Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is part 10 of What If Naruto Was in Bleach and Got Harem with Yoruichi. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also go and support the author, link in description. In the training room basement beneath Naruto's base, Naruto and Gaara both sat side by side calmly as they stared out at the scene in front of them, one of the two in a meditative seated position to feel the area around him more clearly. So you did this. That's really good work, Gaara. Naruto commented in an impressed manner. It looks nice. Maybe we could throw in some grass and trees around here too once I find some. I was tired of the arid appearance of this training ground. Gaara replied matter-of-factly, which sounded rather weird given who he was and where he came from, and it wasn't that hard either. All I had to do was make a massive hole and then fill it with water. He shrugged his shoulders. By the way, your water bill is going to be murderous at the end of the month. Naruto let out a noise of indifference, and that is why I keep so much money all the time, so that I can do stuff like this and get away with it whenever I want. He said, gesturing to the lake directly in front of them. A nod came from his sand-manipulating ally in agreement. Gaara could have just told Naruto what he was doing and he probably could have let him fill it himself, but even though he'd never say it out loud, Gaara probably had fun finding whatever way he could to waste Naruto's cash on something trivial. Well, it wasn't really trivial. Aside from being aesthetically pleasing, it also served an actual purpose as Tatsuki ran for dear life on the surface of the lake, trench knives in hand. She's really getting this down very quickly, Gaara said, impressed with Tatsuki's progress. When he thought about it though, it kind of made sense. A genin was kept busy with teamwork drills, basic training, and missions so that they only really got hands-on upper-level training when they showed potential of achieving such. Seeing as how all Tatsuki had to do was school and training, she didn't have any of the other things getting in her way. By the middle part of her second day after being introduced to it, she got wall walking down enough to get her knives out of the wall. By then Gaara had gotten bored with the scenery in the basement and had made this lake, thus Naruto moved right to the second operational purpose of using her chakra, teaching her to water walk. Naruto wanted to ask Gaara how the hell he managed to fill it so quickly, but then realized he was probably better off not knowing. He also figured that he needed to check the plumbing all over the office later. Or call Urahara and ask him since he probably had something to do with it anyway. Tatsuki-chan. Naruto yelled out to the girl running away on the surface of the water, stop running and fight him. Tatsuki turned towards her blonde teacher and glared at him, you fight him. She shouted back before getting her trench knives up to block a strike from a triple-bladed scythe that knocked her sliding on her heels back across the surface of the water. She looked at the smirking Hidan who was standing on the lake as well, twirling his scythe showingly. Grr, I'm going to lop your head off. She shouted as she ran towards him intent on attacking. That's the spirit. Hidan taunted, lifting his scythe to block the teenage girl's angry strikes. Fight me like you want to end me. Get used to aiming to maim, scar, and kill. Come on. No matter what you do, I can take it. He yelled maniacally as the sparks flew from Tatsuki's trench knives clashing with the pole and blades of his scythe. She was way stronger when she was angry, and Uzumaki said that there weren't any humans around that could use chakra like the old days anymore. My ass, there aren't. This girl's something else altogether. He didn't know what it was, but the way she adjusted to the way of fighting that she needed to learn very quickly impressed Naruto, Gaara, and Hidan as well. Naruto admitted that it was like watching Ichigo fight Zangetsu to get his Benkai, only more drawn out. Though he never said this to her directly, nor did anyone else, it was weird to watch her get stronger by leaps and bounds over the course of a few weeks. None of them knew what it was that was pushing her forward. No one was supposed to get better like this. It was clear that the girl was no stranger to a fight at least. That was good, because they didn't need to teach her the basics of how to face down an enemy. She didn't need to learn the nuances of how battles usually escalated or little ins and outs that only a person that had been in combat could pick up on. She needed to learn how to bring that over from a sparring mindset to an environment where she and her opponents were truly out for blood, but that was something that could easily be achieved by fighting the only one of them that definitely couldn't die no matter what, Hidan, while in his Gigai form. It also served the purpose of giving her human-like targets, much like what Aizen's army would look like. I don't get it, Gaara. Naruto said in confusion as he began paying rapt attention to what was going on in front of them. I understand the knowing how to defend herself, the taking all of this chakra, and Shinigami, and hollow stuff in stride. Why is she getting this good so fast? His voice really reflected his thoughts on the matter. Yoruichi says it's like Ichigo and his Shinigami powers, or Chad and Orihime with theirs, but it shouldn't be, right? I mean, you shouldn't just get a massive jump in skill so fast no matter what, should you? Gaara let out a grunt, signifying that he was thinking, I understand your initial concern. But remember, this has been explained to us already. Tatsuki's repeated interaction with Kurosaki Ichigo and his massive amount of uncontrollable Raryoku wound up warping the environment around him, and her along with it. Naruto interjected abruptly, cutting off Gaara's more or less textbook explanation for what was happening, getting Gaara to turn his rather emotionless stare on Naruto, who didn't look back over at him lest he find himself unnerved by the former cage. Yeah, I know that. I sat through the same speech from Urahara you did. But even so, it still shouldn't be this easy. Well, think of it this way. Gaara tried to reason, she already knew how to fight, and fight at a high level from what we've heard and seen firsthand. That means that her physical energy was at peak form and she knew what to do with it. All you did once Kurosaki got her spiritual energy to match it was teach her how to access the combination of both, i.e. chakra. Naruto still didn't bother looking at Gaara, still choosing to look out at the lake instead. Yeah. Well, I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about that, he said, pointing his finger out at Tatsuki, who dodged a swipe of Hidan's scythe with a nasty little combination of Bunshin and Kawarimi no Jutsu to attack him from behind. She shouldn't be fast enough where a substitution like that was enough to let her get the drop on Hidan. Gaara still didn't see the big deal. As far as he was concerned, it was just a fantastic use of misdirection, the point of the jutsu in the first place. He spoke up as he watched Hidan block and then kick her away stiffly, forcing her to skip across the water like a stone before sinking under. It doesn't look like she got the drop on anything to me. Do you even know how fast she really was in the first place? And even if she wasn't that fast, remember that you would have been judging that off of your standards. Naruto conceded the point and nodded stiffly. That was really good though. I liked it, he said in reference to Tatsuki's performance as he stood up and walked out onto the lake to relieve her. Okay, thanks for going easy today, Hidan, he said to the silver-haired man. Hidan just looked at him olishly before grinning sheepishly. Well damn Uzumaki, I forgot all about that like 10 minutes into the fight. He then saw Naruto's eyes widen. Hey, yeah. Some of those times I was really swinging to disembowel. My bad. She was just lucky he stayed in his gigai if that was the case. Naruto just pointed to the shore where Gaara was, basically telling him to get off of the lake. You're not fighting Tatsuki anymore. Not for a long time. However, that just made what she had done all the more impressive. That entire sequence of combat had lasted around 45 minutes. Scoffing to himself as if it wasn't a big loss at all, Hidan flippantly went to shore. Fine, you're acting like I can't just rip a hole straight to Hawako Mundo when I want to kill something. As he reached land and started walking towards the stairs to head upstairs, he chimed in with something else. By the way, you're a crappy teacher anyway, she only cut me one time. Naruto rolled his eyes and turned his attention to Tatsuki pulling herself out of the water and lying down on her back at the side of the lake. She turned her head towards him and coughed out some water. Hidan's an asshole. Yeah, Naruto said in agreement as he took a seat on the ground next to her, but tell me that fighting him isn't helping though. Tatsuki sat up and shook her head, telling him that she could see how it was helping her. You're really getting things down fast. It took me 4 months to get through surface walking and water walking after I became a ninja. He didn't tell her the other extenuating circumstances for that because after being kicked around for most of an hour she didn't need to know that her free time was a big reason that she was moving along so quickly. The focus and dedication was very much appreciated though. She was definitely taking the whole thing seriously, even before he sicked Hidan on her and basically made her survive. I practice at home too, Tatsuki admitted, frowning at the fact that she was utterly drenched from falling into the lake during the fight with Hidan time and time again. It was understandable that she could do that too. All she had learned were the basics, none of which were destructive, loud, attention-attracting, or anything like that. There was no reason at all that she couldn't take her training into her own hands away from the office. Is that bad? She asked after not getting a response from Naruto at first. Without looking at her, he shook his head. When I was a kid, there wasn't anything wrong with being able to do things like we can do. That was a long time ago though, and now who knows what people would do if they knew. You can practice on your own. I'm happy that you do. Just make sure that nobody knows you can do this stuff, especially when you start learning the more destructive stuff. At the mere mention of destructive stuff, Tatsuki's eyes let off a nearly unnoticeable shine as she looked over into her teacher's face. Now by destructive stuff, you mean some of the things that I've seen you do when you and Gaara fight. Or some of the stuff I see you do when you and Yoruichi fight. Naruto looked at her and raised an eyebrow before turning his head to look back out at the lake. Oh hell no. Most of the stuff I can do takes tons of power that I don't think you have. And I don't really think I've even busted out the big guns in front of you yet. I don't want to destroy parts of Karakura town, or get you killed trying to use any of my moves. He noticed Tatsuki frown and start to grumble and spoke again. I didn't say I wasn't going to teach you anything though. Since I can't teach you my first real ninjutsu without probably killing you out of negligence or the next thing on the list in my repertoire without trusting you more, I'll skip to the next thing. Next thing? Tatsuki said questioningly. What next thing is that? In response, Naruto held up his right hand, forming a spinning blue orb of chakra in it. Tatsuki thought that it was very pretty, but other than being a way of showing off visible chakra, she didn't see what the big deal about it was. Naruto picked up on this. You've never seen me use this, have you? Tatsuki shook her head saying that she indeed had not. Well, just so you know, we're skipping straight from the D rank techniques to the A rank. Tatsuki still looked at the orb of chakra skeptically. What's so a rank about this? Her answer came when Naruto slammed the orb down on the ground between them, throwing up debris and cratering the ground where it hit. And this made Tatsuki desperately want to learn this ninjutsu, and this is called. She asked, a more enthusiastic tone in her voice. Rasengan, spiraling sphere. Naruto informed her, pleased that she was impressed with the jutsu. It's not only as strong as you can see right here, but for those of us with what I like to call stupid hands, you don't need to know any hand seals to use it. This was kind of a boon for me when I was younger because I was terrible at using hand seals. I still kind of suck at it and most of my jutsu don't really use many of them if any at all. And Tatsuki honestly hated hand seals. She liked keeping her hands in fists so that she could fight. Letting her guard down to make a bunshin or even to prepare a kawarimi went against everything she knew about keeping up a guard. Having a jutsu ready that she only needed to charge the chakra for was exactly what she wanted, and having one that actually did something offensive was even more appealing. Excitedly jumping to her feet with a grin on her face, Tatsuki looked ready for more work, impressive again due to having had fought Hidan for most of the hour prior. Alright then, sounds good to me. So what's first? First, Naruto commented, still not looking at her, which confused her since he had only looked at her once and had made a concerted effort to keep from doing so again ever since then. You're going to go get dry and change clothes because I can see through them. Tatsuki blushed and looked at herself, noticing this fact. Gaara's been staring at you for the last few minutes. Tatsuki turned to look across the lake after Naruto's accusation of Gaara only to find sand blowing where he had just been sitting. Growling to herself about her drenched state, Tatsuki started walking off, stomping on the surface of the water, cursing out Hidan as she was set on heading upstairs and getting herself together again. That's surprising. Naruto put a smile on his face as he heard Yoruichi's voice from behind him. I fully expected you to be gawking at Tatsuki the entire time. You would have been staring at me like you had X-ray vision if I had been the one all wet. Naruto stood up and turned around to face the former Shinigami captain. She's too young, you know that. He remarked, getting a roll of golden eyes from Yoruichi. Even comparing their ages was like comparing a garden pond to a landmark lake. I feel strange enough with the relationship that you and I have. I can't just go around ogling high school girls. Especially ones that he knew, at least when they knew that he was watching them. I'm a responsible sensei, Yoruichi-chan. Yeah, sure, whatever. Yoruichi said dryly before getting to the heart of the matter she had come to see him for. Kisuke's got the portal set to leave for tomorrow. And as a bonus, they know we're coming this time, so no dealing with a veritable army of Shinigami again. She sounded rather cheerful at that before taking on a pointed look. Who's in charge while we're gone? Oh, Gaara for sure. Naruto replied without missing a beat, taking note of the satisfied look on his second-in-command's face. What's with that look? It's Gaara or Hidan, and I don't even trust Hidan not to disembowel Tatsuki during a spar anymore, let alone keep everyone else alive until we get back. I'm not even taking the whole former cage thing into account yet, but that's another point even if you don't get the reference. Yoruichi got behind Naruto and jumped on his back, so we're good to go, right? She asked as he began walking back towards the stairs to go upstairs. We can just head out first thing tomorrow and that'll be that. Sounds good to me. Naruto said with a grin on his face. He sure as hell didn't want to go to school again either. This was a great excuse to not do so. A business trip sounds great. I need to check on my account in the Soul Society anyway. XXX. The next day, Karakura High School. In Ichigo's body, eyed the empty seat nearby that had been more or less designated as Uzumaki Naruto's seat. While he didn't know too much about the guy personally, at least not as much as he knew about Ichigo's other friends, he did know that the reason he was currently in Ichigo's body living his life in the original stead was because Naruto had said or done something that had resulted in Ichigo taking on his Shinigami form for an extended period of time. He also didn't really have the time to ask Ichigo's other friends about where he just so happened to be, or why they weren't there with him. Whenever school ended, they would all usually head off almost immediately to do whatever it was that they did. It wasn't anything like going home since he knew where they lived, and the ways that they took certainly weren't to their homes. It was all very suspicious to him. Man, no one tells me anything. Khan thought as he looked over the entire classroom in boredom. Even Ichigo didn't divulge where he was going or what he was doing before he left his body. He'd better at least be doing something productive. XXX. Visored's hideout, training ground. 2 barriers around the outside of the warehouse, 1 barrier around the majority of the training ground itself beneath the warehouse. This was all required so that Ichigo's Reiatsu did not leak out and alert absolutely everyone and everything that could sense even the slightest amount of it to his presence or current existence. There was a very good reason to hide the latter at the moment. Staring inside of the barrier set inside of the training ground at all of the dust and debris in the air, Shinji let out a groan of exasperation. He's going to break that Bakudo, isn't he? He asked as if he already knew the answer, looking towards Hachi who seemed to be struggling to maintain it. Yes, it looks like it. The gigantic man said in a reserved, polite manner. I don't believe it will hold for too much longer. Fantastic, Shinji said sarcastically before turning to the other Visoreds in the room. Okay, who's going in first to hold that thing back? All fingers flew towards him, getting his jaw to drop. Hey, just why should I go first? I'm the leader here. Lisa was the first to respond to his question. Well, if you're the leader, then lead by example and show us how to handle things. She said nonchalantly. You've all done this before. You know how to do it. Shinji shouted in reply before calming down and turning towards the barrier, scratching his head. Well, someone needs to get in there, and I mean now. Hiyori stood up and stomped over to the barrier in a huff. Fine. I'll go first. There's no way that dumbass bastard could be that tough. Hachi opened the barrier for me. She snapped, getting a small opening in the barrier made for her to enter, allowing her to feel the Reiatsu leaking out that took her slightly aback before she quickly pulled herself together. So he's got some power, no big deal. She said as she stepped inside and allowed the barrier to reclose. The dust enshrouding the inside of the barrier cleared to reveal a white, muscular, humanoid lizard complete with black markings, a long thick tail, spikes protruding from its shoulders, and 3 toes. It had a skull mask on its face, long orange hair, the tattered remnants of a Shinigami hakama around its waist and legs, and most importantly, Zangetsu in its right hand. Outside of the barrier, Love, not looking at a manga to pass time due to the seriousness of this event, looked at the scene inside of it and remarked, do you think we should have made Naruto come down here and do this? It's kind of his fault that we skipped to this part so soon. I don't think that's appropriate in this case. Rose said, focusing intently on Ichigo in his hollow form, We told him to bring Ichigo to us but didn't tell him much more about how exactly we were going to help him control his powers. If he sped things along with his words then that was probably because he didn't know about this part of the training. From inside the barrier the fight had started between Hiyori and Hollow Ichigo, tearing up a lot of the landscape within right off the bat. Kensai had a frown on his face, but that was usual. I say if anyone pays for this crap it should be Urahara. It's really his fault that this happened in the first place. XXX. Urahara shop. Training ground. Achoo. Urahara wiped his nose following his sudden sneeze. I hope that was some beautiful lady talking about me just now. He said to himself before turning to Naruto and Yoruichi, so it's just you two going? He asked. Dressed in his red sage coat and corresponding gear, Naruto nodded before shrugging, who else would go? Everyone else that could go is busy, and I can't take Hidan or Gaara because that would start something we probably wouldn't be able to explain or finish. Besides, Yoruichi added on, this is going to require a diplomatic touch. She jerked her thumb towards Naruto, I shouldn't even be taking him for this. Gaara's more diplomatic than he is. She ignored the deadpan look coming from her blonde companion, but he's the one that's supposed to be heading this whole thing up, so if he didn't go something would seem off. Do you know how many years I've wanted a position of leadership? Naruto asked Yoruichi, I've wanted to do stuff like this since I was a kid. There's no way I'm screwing this up. Everyone will know we're legit after this is over with. Urahara smirked as he walked over to Tessai to begin the opening of the portal, so what exactly are we called then? He asked. I mean, we're not the Gote 13 so you can't just tack a number onto the end of a squad. As he made his way to the outline of the portal he noticed that Naruto hadn't answered yet. You don't know what we're supposed to be called yet, do you? He asked amusedly as the portal opened. I'll be sure to work on that. Naruto replied dryly before turning to Yoruichi, are we going to get chased by that Kotatsu thing that came after us the last time? No. They probably turned it off since they know we're coming. Yoruichi said as she walked towards the open portal, but even if we did get chased, you can outrun it right? She then jumped through and began heading towards the Soul Society. Naruto sighed and shook his head before addressing Urahara and Tessai. What you told me about Nell, do you know what you're going to do to help her? Nope. Urahara said brightly, getting a deep frown out of Naruto, don't look so worried about it. She'll be fine staying here with her brothers until I come up with something. It might not be as hard as we think it will be. Maybe. Things had been going way too well for them anyway. That was the best they were going to get for the time being it appeared, so Naruto accepted that, alright. I'm counting on you Urahara. Earn that paycheck. He said as he jumped into the portal and left the world of the living. You pay everyone in cash though. Urahara shouted after him before deactivating the portal. Once the Senkaimon faded, he looked at Tessai. Well, let's get back to work shall we? Figuring out how to stop that leak of spiritual energy from Little Nell's mask. I have an idea if I could suggest it. Tessai stated as they started to leave the room, though I am not sure of just what extent such a course of action would manage to fix or if the person we need for my idea is skilled enough for it. The look on Urahara's face under his bucket hat showed that he was paying attention. XXX. Soul Society, West Rukongai 1st District. Took you long enough. Yoruichi chimed from her seat on a rooftop as Naruto walked down through the streets, probably searching for her. Did you get tripped up in the tunnel, sweetie? She asked in a teasing manner. Naruto gave a sarcastic laugh up at the dark-skinned female Shinigami. I didn't know we were running. And I thought that we were supposed to be diplomatic about this whole thing. Doesn't that mean we're supposed to be serious? Yoruichi nodded and pointed off in the direction of the Seraiti. Yeah, but we're not there yet. I don't have to act all uptight until I walk through those gates. Then I can let out the Shihuan Yoruichi that was the 22nd head of my clan, captain of the 2nd division, and the leader of the Onmitsukido and you can let out, whatever serious part of Uzumaki Naruto exists. She jumped down from where she had been sitting on the roof and landed in front of Naruto. So what's the plan, boss man? How are you going to get us sanctioned by the Gote 13? I couldn't give a fuck less if we were sanctioned by the Gote 13 Yoruichi-chan, and to hell with that 10-year trial period, the old man was talking about back when the idea was first planted in my head. Naruto said, Getting a confused look out of Yoruichi. We're not meant to be an actual working part of the Seraiti. We're meant to operate outside of it, to handle the things that we think should be taken care of. If we wind up being one of them, then what exactly makes us different from any other little division of the Gote 13 or any other part of the Seraiti? She started to get it. Yoruichi understood what Naruto was doing here. If he wasn't lobbying for a position as a sanctioned faction of the Seraiti, you just want to let them know that the way you're doing this is working. Without you going through their usual channels of protocol, we can get things moving way faster than they can. That's it. Naruto confirmed for her, we're just here to tell them what we've found out that Joubaki didn't tell them because she left. Let the old man Yamamoto know that we're willing to help. And we'll even do this Aizen stuff for free because it needs to be done, but we need to get paid if they want our help later. That's how things are going to go. If people want our help and know how to find us, and can pay us, then we'll go ahead and work for them. Guns for hire, Yoruichi said, liking the sound of working at her own pace and schedule. So that's your vision of what you want for us? My vision. Naruto remarked derisively, what do you know about my vision? My vision would turn your world upside down, tear asunder your illusions and send the sanctuary of your own true ignorance crashing down around you. Now ask yourself, are you really ready to see that vision? He asked, bringing them to a halt to stare intently at her. Yoruichi just looked at him owlishly and shrugged her shoulders, I don't know. Probably. The serious stare from Naruto dropped and he grinned at her sheepishly as they started walking again. Hey, I was just joking anyway, kind of. What's up, Jidanbu? He greeted the massive gate guardian that had lifted the door for them to enter the Seraiti. Jidanbu could only wave one hand as the other held up the gate on his shoulders as he had heard what Naruto had said and didn't exactly know how to receive that last comment. Jidanbu started to say once he allowed the gates of the Seraiti to lower again. I was told to inform you both upon your arrival that you were to head towards the 1st Division barracks at the earliest possible time to speak with Yamamoto Sotaicho. Well, isn't that convenient? Yoruichi said cheerfully, rapping Naruto on the shoulder, and to think, we were headed that way right now. That's a long way to go though. She then got a sly smile on her face before asking him a question, so Naruto, do you want to play a game? There went that damn smile that Naruto damn well despised. It either meant something cool was about to happen, or something was about to piss him off, and since it was still daylight out it wasn't going to be the cool thing. What game? Naruto asked her despite himself. And his answer came when Yoruichi suddenly blurred out of his sight and he felt a presence on his back. Just a little game of tag. Yoruichi said in his ear quietly. When he reached to grab a hold of her he let off a scoff due to it being an afterimage. Growling to himself as he could just hear her laughing on the wind, Naruto turned to Jidanbu who gave him a silent thumbs up. Well, at least trying to catch Yoruichi would make an otherwise cumbersome trip all the way across the Seraiti much more lively. He might as well enjoy it either way. Naruto jumped up on one of the high walls lining the streets of the Seraiti and cupped his hands around his mouth. You'd better be headed straight to the 1st Division Yoruichi-chan because your ass is mine, Datbeo. He shouted. Ha! Datbeo. I still love that. He heard Yoruichi shout with some humor in her voice, getting Naruto's eye to twitch before he took off in a blur in search of her. XXX. Karakura Town. So, Tatsuki said, trench knives in hand as she stood in her fighting stance in a park. You guys are sure I have to do this? She asked rather tentatively as she gripped her weapons tightly. Standing a distance away from her was a gray scorpion-like hollow with a saber-tooth mask skittering around an empty playground. Her last run-in with a hollow wasn't exactly pleasant. One didn't necessarily enjoy getting their body taken over by a giant octopus monster. Nearby, Chad nodded to her question. You have to know that you're able to fight a hollow and win Tatsuki, at least fight well enough to defend yourself. Nothing bad will happen as long as we're here. We were asked to come with you for that reason. If things got bad they were more than capable of stepping in to ensure Tatsuki's safety. Orihime was much more enthusiastic with her reinforcement. You can do it, Tatsuki-chan. Show that hollow what you've got. Give it that new move that you said Naruto taught you. I didn't even learn it yet. Tatsuki snapped before turning her attention to the hollow that had stopped puttering about and had now locked eyes with her, freezing both of them in place. Any advice anyone? Tatsuki asked quietly, waiting out the hollow's first move. Ryu was the only one to chime in with anything on that front. Aim for the mask if you want to get rid of it quickly. It'll regenerate attacks that aren't particularly fatal. He wished he could do something to fight if push came to shove, but he still didn't have his powers back, hence he was only an informed spectator in this instance, and don't wait for it to attack first. Why? Tatsuki asked, turning to look at Ryu and wonder why he was giving her that kind of advice. Wasn't it better to react to an enemy than to rush in blindly with no information on how your adversary worked? Ryu just pointed at the scorpion-looking hollow as he replied, that's why. Tatsuki turned her attention back to the hollow and found that it had spat a rather lengthy spine at Tatsuki, forcing her to jump out of the way as it impaled a tree. She then watched the tree wither and die within seconds of being stabbed through by the hollow's attack. What the hell? Tatsuki shouted loudly, scorpions don't do that. It's a scorpion hollow. Ryu supplied helpfully, tilting his glasses up onto his face and getting nods of agreement from Chad and Orihime. You're not helping, jerk. Tatsuki shouted before turning her attention back to the hollow as it roared loudly. Okay, just pretend that this is dodging practice all over again, only if I screw up I die. It sounded simple, except for the dying part. That part sounded painful. The hollow let out another roar as it basically charged Tatsuki, snapping its front claws as it advanced. As it got close, Tatsuki dodged a snap of each claw before dodging its back stinger as it missed her and stabbed into the ground, killing the grass within a 5-foot radius with the poison it had injected it with. Tatsuki backed off and made 3 hand seals before a quartet of Tatsukas appeared around the hollow and began circling it rapidly in an attempt to disorient it. As it spun around trying to guess which Tatsuki was real, it started taking slashes and punch mark puncture wounds in its blind spots. Eventually it got sick of getting hit and regenerating its wounds and used its tail to bat all of Tatsuki's clones out of existence. After getting rid of the clones, the hollow looked around for the now absent Tatsuki as it hadn't hit anything solid when it rid itself of the multitude of Bunshin. Ha! Tatsuki then dropped a crushing falling heel kick across the back of the hollow, getting a hiss of pain from the massive monster as its legs nearly crumbled from the pressure of the attack. Almost, because it was still tough enough to stay upright. Oh come on. That should have broken you in half, she mumbled to herself before she saw the tail swing about overhead. Crap. The tail stabbed downward while Tatsuki was still in the middle of kneeling from her heel drop. Tatsuki lifted and crossed her trench knives in an effort to block, keeping the tail from stabbing into her. However, the force behind the stab knocked her off of the hollow's back to the ground. Tatsuki groaned at being knocked down and disoriented before getting her bearings back in time to roll out of the way of another stab from the hollow. After dodging a series of rapid-fire stabs, Tatsuki got back to her feet and directly punched at the tail when it came her way again, knocking it back with surprising strength. She hit the tail so hard that the hollow wasn't prepared for it and wound up being knocked back on its back legs, leaving its underbelly exposed. Tatsuki smirked at the opening left for her and rushed towards the hollow before giving off a loud yell of exertion and delivering a hard flying kick right to the underbelly of the scorpion hollow, knocking it onto its back. Finish it off already. Ryu said in a bored voice. I'm getting to it. Tatsuki snapped back as she ran at the hollow that had managed to get itself upright, just in time for her to punch it directly in the mask where she began unleashing a combination of punches with her trench knives that made the hollow backpedal due to the impact, but did nothing otherwise. I can't break the mask with just my punches. Orihime saw the hollow stumble and scuttle back to get some distance before opening its mouth once more. Tatsuki-chan, look out. She shouted in warning, preparing to intervene with her shunrika if the need arose. The hollow fired a large spire into the air that exploded and started dropping spines all over the ground in something of a scatter shot. Tatsuki dodged and made liberal use of kawarimi with spines that had already stabbed themselves into the ground as she drew closer to the hollow that seemed frozen in place. She clenched her fists and looked down at her weapons. I don't have an attack jutsu, but I do have these. I think Naruto-sensei said that channeling chakra to these things did something. I don't remember, he said it in passing, that we'd get to it later. Well, she didn't have anything to lose at this point other than her life, and if she didn't come up with a way to end the fight she might just lose that anyway. Tatsuki guided chakra to her fists and by proxy her trench knives and ran forward at the prone hollow. Apparently that last fire and forget attack came with some kind of recoil with it because it still hadn't moved yet. She cocked one hand back and unleashed a punch as hard as she could, right at the mask of the hollow as if it were a board she needed to break. Her bladed fist impacted right off of the mask, cracking it harshly with a blue ripple rolling through the cracks, momentary remnants of her chakra as blood flew from it. Surprised by the amount of damage that one punch dealt, Tatsuki stood in awe, fist still outstretched. Tatsuki. Chad yelled across the park to her, it's not finished yet. Don't stop. That snapped her focus back and she drew her other fist back, generating chakra through it before unleashing her second punch that destroyed the mask and by proxy the hollow along with it. As the hollow dispersed into spiritual particles, Tatsuki just blinked repeatedly as her adrenaline died down. She looked down at her fists before a grin stretched out over her face, hell yeah. I did it. Stupid hollows better think twice before they mess with Arasawa Tatsuki. She then collapsed and sat down on the ground, breathing heavily. Orihime ran over and gave her best friend a huge hug. That was so great, Tatsuki. Your first fight with a hollow and you didn't even get hurt. She was ecstatic that Tatsuki didn't require any healing. She looked at Chad and Ryu, wasn't that great? Chad had a small smile on his face, at least you didn't pass out afterwards like I did. He commented. You could have finished a bit faster, you looked lost for a lot of that fight. Ryu critiqued, getting the middle finger from Tatsuki in return, it's just an opinion, he grumbled under his breath quietly, when you were hitting the hollow solidly in the mask the first time, why didn't that finish it? The second time you attacked like that it did. Taking a moment from her little victory lap, Tatsuki looked at her trench knives to explain, well the first time I didn't generate any chakra through the knives. Without chakra I couldn't punch through the mask, but I thought Naruto-sensei said that using chakra would make me cut through anything I hit like that other guy he talked about that had these before me. All I did was just hit harder. She said as if she were actually disappointed that her punches were now stronger. Oh well, it was another question to ask once he came back from wherever he was. Maybe she was just doing it wrong. It didn't feel like it though. Orihime helped Tatsuki back to her feet, so are you ready for another one? She asked, in high spirits now that she knew Tatsuki could beat a hollow. Tatsuki's face froze in a smile that actually belied her trepidation, another one. She said in a rather tentative manner, you mean there are more? Ryu nodded slowly, there are usually always more somewhere, and since Ichigo is off doing whatever it is he's doing, someone has to deal with them. He left out the fact that he really couldn't do much without his powers. Man, it kept coming back to that. He needed something to fix that little issue and in a hurry. Having his Raryoku sealed off after his fights in the Soul Society was really a pain. He was all but useless the way he was. And that someone is us. Tatsuki asked, pointing between the three of them, wait, doesn't that Saraiti place send Shinigami to do this crap for us? Chad nodded, well yeah, but they usually leave the world of the living alone for the most part. Since we get a lot of trouble they sent one guy with an afro, but he kind of sucks. Ryu finished for Chad, who was too nice to just flat out shoot the guy down. He isn't going to be able to get them all if a massive outbreak occurs, not even close. And that's where we come in. Not to mention the fact that there was a standing bounty for hollows defeated in Karakura town for anyone in the little group of the spiritually aware. Apparently Naruto did have rather deep pockets since he was footing the bill. Tatsuki raised her hand, I kind of suck, so wouldn't I be better served to go back to the base, or better yet, home? She could keep fighting these hollows, but these hollows weren't as strong as those Arankar girls she got into a tiff with previously. She hadn't even cracked Naruto's directions for the Rasengan yet, so there was no telling how long it would take her to learn that, and she didn't think fighting hollows would help her get it down anyway. Her answer came when Orihime grabbed a hold of her hand and started running off, probably towards the location of the next hollow to face. Come on Tatsuki-chan. Kurosaki-kun is busy so it's up to us. What the hell could Ichigo be doing that's so important? Tatsuki asked belligerently as everyone started heading off to hunt for hollows. XXX. Visored's hideout, training ground. I'm tagging out. A rather disheveled-looking Rose said, his long blonde hair all out of sorts as he stepped out of the barrier enclosing Hollow Ichigo to take a seat next to the other amassed Visoreds that had also been taking turns fighting with Ichigo. As no one immediately jumped up to take his place, he spoke up again. Hey, I was just in there for the last 2 hours, someone else go in there. Kensai stood up with a sigh and punched his right fist into his palm. Fine, I'll smack the kid around for a bit longer. The silver-haired man said as the barrier opened for him to enter from. How long are you going to take to beat your inner Hollow's ass? You're taking longer than Hiyori did. He taunted. Hiyori took offense to being used in an insult. Hey, less talking about me, more beating the crap out of dumbass over there. Ichigo let out a roar of a monstrous voice with tinges of his own original voice in it. Kensai drew his Zanpakuto and rolled his eyes. Yeah, whatever, I've got something for you ugly. Photobase, Tachika's blow it away, earth-severing wind. Currents of air whirled around Kensai before it dissipated and revealed that his Zanpakuto had transformed into a combat knife with a ring on the gray hilt. He flipped the weapon in his hand and held it in a backwards grip. Seeing his Shikai, Mashiro yelled out to him, Hey Kensai. Are you going to use your Kamehameha wave? She asked rather innocently. Kensai turned towards her with a twitching eye as he gnashed his teeth. For the last fucking time Mashiro, that is not what it's called. It doesn't even have a name. You know it doesn't have a name. It's just an attack. Right. Mashiro replied cheerfully, so I'm naming it for you, and I'm just telling you what it looks like. It's not my fault you ripped it off from Dragon Ball. I've been using that attack for more than 100 goddamn years. You were my lieutenant, you should know that. How can you say I ripped it off from anything, especially some dumb manga? Kensai snapped at her irritably. Hey. Love, Lisa, and Rose all said simultaneously in insulted tones of voice. Love pointed directly at Kensai in a dramatic manner. The life lessons taught in that manga were passed down to an entire generation of young boys that grew up to run the world of the living today. Kensai let out an indignant snort. Yeah, that's why the world of the living today absolutely sucks. Lisa crossed her arms over her chest and glared. Thou shalt not belittle or slight the adventures of Son Goku or his band of Dragon Ball hunting warriors. That's why I hope Ichigo blows you away like he looks like he's going to. She said, informing Kensai of his impending doom. Huh. Kensai turned around to find Ichigo charging a Sero at the tip of his claws on one hand. Oh crap, Kensai said with trepidation as he hurriedly drew his hands together over his Zanpakuto grip and generated a ball of energy in hands, pumping it backwards to centralize the power before thrusting his hands forward and firing off a white energy blast that matched Ichigo's Sero. The red Sero and the white blast of Kensei's energy beam clashed together in a stalemate, pushing against one another until Kensei's mask appeared on his face in the appearance of a flat hockey face guard with 3 bands that went around the back of his head. Kensai shouted in a distorted voice as his attack began to overpower Ichigo's and send the possessed substitute Shinigami back with the blast that pulverized rock and everything else that got in its way. Kensai let his mask fade from view and smirked to himself in a satisfied manner. Don't try to sneak up on me kid, you're a few years too early to try something like that. Yeah. Kensai with the Kamehameha for the win. God damn it, that's not what it's called. Kensai snapped at Mashiro again, only to get her pointing behind him in response. Really? He's back up already. He turned his head to talk some more smack to Hollow Ichigo. You'd think you'd. That was as far as he got before Ichigo's tail forcefully smashed him through a nearby rock. Ooh. All of the Visoreds said from their position as spectators as they cringed along with the hit. Mashiro then shook her head pitifully. Poor Kensai, he should have used instant transmission. Shut up. Kensai yelled as he started freeing himself from the rubble. Once he got back to his feet and wiped the blood from his face, Ichigo roared at him and Kensai angrily yelled back at him before the two charged each other to continue fighting. XXX. Seraiti 1st Division Barracks. Yamamoto looked out at Naruto and Yoruichi, standing out in front of him in the assembly room. At the moment, all of the other captains of the Gotei 13 were in attendance as well for the meeting. The captain of the 2nd Division, Soi Fan, has given me the briefing of your actions in exploring Hueco Mundo. The old captain commander had his eyes closed as he spoke. The most important thing I've taken from what I've been told is that you can form a stable connection to Hueco Mundo anytime you wish to do so and then make it so that you can return. That's right. Naruto said, confirming Soy Fon's earlier debriefing to Yamamoto after her return from her mission to the world of the living, but I would rather not use my powers like that for no good reason. This was him being completely honest. Some things that I'm capable of just aren't meant to be done on demand. Seeing himself as a true sage, Naruto took his role as the bridge between the physical and spiritual world rather seriously. He had ever since he had found that he was able to see roaming spirits. He wasn't about to use the Getu to jettison entire groups of Shinigami into Hawako Mundo to launch guerrilla attacks. They wouldn't stop at just fighting Aizen's army. They would exterminate every hollow or Arankar they saw, and from Naruto's experience with Nel, Peshi, Dondochaka, and Gaara, he knew that there were those that roamed Hawako Mundo that weren't inherently evil. He left Hidan out of this group for obvious reasons. He was alright with dealing only with hollows that roamed into the human world or the soul society to devour souls since there was no need for them to be there otherwise. Yamamoto let out a pondering thought. I surmise that mere monetary compensation would not be enough for me to barter passage for my forces to Hawako Mundo. Naruto shook his head with a frown on his face. Sorry, but no. I understand that there's a war brewing and I'll do what I can to stop that or help you out, especially since you're actually commissioning us for help for pay, but I won't just send Shinigami there for the sake of it. He pointed at Kenpachi. Like say I let him go just for the hell of it. What do you think he'd do? Kenpachi grinned at the prospect of being left to himself in Hawako Mundo, thus emphasizing Naruto's point. Yamamoto raised an eyebrow. While keeping the bloodshed to a minimum is understandable, a Shinigami's Zanpakuto purifies the Hollow's soul so that they may pass over to the Soul Society as pluses, peaceful souls. If we were to send our Shinigami in to hunt for Hollows, it would be more of a good thing than a bad thing in any view. Hearing that all Hollows were evil again made Naruto think of the ones that he had been acquainted with, and how scared Nell seemed when she had first met him and realized that Soy Fon, Nemu, and Omaeda were Shinigami. I'll say it again, I'm a sage. I hate killing, but sometimes it needs to be done. I cherish all sorts of existence, all forms of life and even souls. This isn't as black and white as you like to make it look. I'm not going to just start slaughtering Hollows for no reason. He wasn't about to directly start a genocide of any kind. If Naruto didn't want to open the Getu, then not even the use of force would compel him to. He seemed to be that sort of person, and his abilities were unable to be duplicated thus far even with the studies that had been done by Karatsuchi. The eyes of the old warrior opened to stare at Naruto sternly. You have principles. I respect that. However, if your principles run against the safety and protection of the Seraiti, we will have an issue with one another, Uzumaki-san. I would advise against that for your sake. Naruto just nodded. Being a smartass would help no one in this situation. He had taken the measure of an entire group of the strongest in the world dead set on ending his life back when he was young, with an entire army backing them near the end, and after experiencing that he didn't feel like provoking a similar predicament again for absolutely no reason. At this point Yoruichi stepped into the conversation. We would never attempt to harm the Seraiti or any part of the Soul Society Yamamoto Sotaicho, but we reserve the right to pick and choose the assignments that we undertake. She put one hand on her hip as she kept up the serious atmosphere. We are not a part of the Soul Society or the Seraiti at all. 3 of us are exiled from here as a matter of fact. The members of our group are handpicked and recruited from our own findings, and we receive no mandatory reinforcement from the Gote 13 unless it has already been confirmed that we're to work together. You've expressed this already. Yamamoto said candidly. He didn't want to let it be known, but both of the guests of the Gote 13 probably already knew. Having a rogue contingent aware and able to openly meddle with affairs of both the spiritual and living worlds didn't sit well with him. Especially with such formerly high-profile members such as Shihuan Yoruichi, Urahara Kazuki, and Tsukubishi Tessai in its ranks, all important figures in the Seraiti prior to their exile. Still, they had done nothing wrong as far as he had seen yet. Not even the representative Shinigami currently stationed in Karakura town in place of Kuchiki Rukia, Kurumadani Zenisuke, had come up with anything negative in his periodic reports, though he had sent back intelligence on a series of skirmishes fought in Karakura between combatants with high levels of Reiatsu, though he was unable to arrive on the scene in time to bear witness to any of the event. Yoruichi picked up where she left off before Yamamoto interjected. then you'll know that we're merely informing the Seraiti of our actions out of general courtesy. We intend to operate as intended regardless of your consent, seeing as how we've refrained from breaking any laws that would have any bearing over the Soul Society. Man, Yoruichi-chan in captain mode is super hot. Naruto thought to himself, though he refrained from showing this on the outside, choosing instead to put up a unyielding front of solidarity with Yoruichi. It stood to be mentioned though that game face Yoruichi was certainly asserting their point as diplomatically as possible while still expressing one very important point. The point was basically them saying, we don't want to step on any toes or anything and we actually want to help you, but no matter what happens here this group will not be disbanded since we haven't done anything that would make it an issue. Yukitake took this moment to ask a question. As a separate entity completely separate from the entire Soul Society, could we at least get a scope of your ranks? Maybe a short rundown of your active force. Naruto and Yoruichi both looked at each other before Naruto addressed the white-haired sickly captain. I can't do that without compromising the security and possible safety of a few of our operatives, but I can tell you the first few members that joined. There's myself, Shihuan Yoruichi, he said, gesturing to said Shinigami woman, Urahara Kazuki, Tsukubishi Tesai. The two young workers in Urahara's employ might be members one day soon, maybe, and that's all I can give you at the moment. He said, sounding apologetic as he trusted Yukitake after he had attempted to assist him against Yamamoto during the attempt to save Rukia. I have to protect my own people first in this instance. Soi Fan was the only one who knew why that was really important though, and unless the topic was brought to her she wasn't about to potentially betray Yoruichi, and Uzumaki as well she guessed. If it wasn't meant to be said then she wasn't going to blurt it out, especially since it really had no bearing on the overall safety of the Seraiti which was Yamamoto's primary concern. Still, even off of what they heard from him that was one hell of a lineup by itself even without knowing who else the group had. Two ex-captains and the former Kido Corps commander, not exactly anything to sneeze at when it came to firepower by any stretch of the imagination. At that juncture in the meeting, Shunsui decided to try and venture a question out since his best friend had just done so, though his was decidedly less serious. Not a bad thing, since the tension in the room had grown palpable by this point. So this group that you guys are making up, do you even have a name for it, or are we just going to call you those guys? Once again Yoruichi looked at Naruto who rolled his eyes. She could have told them the name he came up with on the way to the 1st Division barracks just as easily as he could have. She was there and he told her what it was to keep her informed. Naruto cleared his throat before addressing the flamboyantly garbed captain and the others as well. I guess you can call us Equilibrium, he said with a grin as he rubbed the back of his neck. The small, white spiky-haired Captain Hitsugaya Tushiro stepped forward. So what exactly do you do? What's the point of your existence as a group? Yoruichi answered, to do what needs to be done. A small smile appeared on her face, for a fee more often than not. We'll be capable of doing the things that you can't or won't. We can go everywhere, even the places that you're not able to, and get rid of the problems that you might not even know about if that's what we feel like doing. What is this, a TV commercial? Naruto thought to himself. Good final cell to leave on though, he had to admit with a shake of his head, that's all we've got for you. That is, if that's all you need. He asked as he turned back towards Yamamoto who thought for a moment before giving a nod. He wasn't going to get anything useful information-wise out of the pair as things stood. They shared all they had on Aizen and his Arankar. There was nothing else urgent at the moment. If you need us, you know how to reach us. Naruto said conclusively. Yamamoto tapped his staff Zanpakuto on the ground loudly. In that instance, the meeting is adjourned. Everyone is dismissed and allowed to go back to their usual duties. He more or less ordered as the room began to clear out of the captains and the visitors, Naruto and Yoruichi. If Shihuan Dono and Uzumaki-san would just wait for a moment however. He finished, getting the two to stop and turn around as everyone else left. I have a request. A request? Naruto repeated with a raised eyebrow before crossing his arms over his chest. Will we be getting paid for this request? He asked pointedly before catching a sharp elbow to the side from Yoruichi. Honestly, Yoruichi thought to herself as she regained the group's poise in this situation. Naruto had tact and could orate well, but apparently his impetuous nature was just something that he couldn't keep under wraps for very long periods of time. If it hadn't been fixed by now, then there was nothing Yoruichi could do at this point. What do you need us to do for you, Yamamoto Sotaicho? It's nothing major, I assure you. Yamamoto stated in an exact manner. And yes, you will be compensated for this request if that really matters to you. We're listening. Naruto said, turning his eyes towards Yoruichi, who happened to be giving him a light glare. What? I'm not working my first actual assignment from the Seraiti for free. I haven't had an actual paying job in forever. He told her, emphasizing the paying part of his statement since she technically never paid him for all of his trouble from assisting in the rescue of Rukia. It's a very simple job, not complicated at all. Yamamoto claimed, you won't have to do any actual work at all, come to think of it. Even if there was no work for this job, neither of them liked the way that sounded. Naruto was reminded once again from the serene look on Yamamoto's face that he really didn't like old men that were still older than him. Because that meant that life experience still gave them at least one extra trick up their sleeve more than him. XXX. Nightfall. Karakura Town. Ryu was looking down in the back of an alleyway with his cell phone out and by his ear. The patrol around town for any possible hollows on the prowl led to a strange discovery as darkness began to settle. Ah, well, hello there to you. Urahara's enthusiastic voice came over the other line. Hearing the man's voice, Ryu immediately launched into conversation. Urahara-san, I think I've found something extremely. Urahara's voice then picked up once more, cutting Ryu off. Thank you for contacting Urahara shop. Your call is very important to us. Unfortunately, no one is able to reach the phone to help you at this time, so please leave a message and I promise we'll get back to you at the soonest possible convenience. God damn it, Ryu muttered as he hung his phone up and pocketed it. He then kneeled down and reached a hand out to touch two lifeless bodies on the ground. They had no wounds on them and there was no sign of a hollow attack anywhere around either. As Ryu adjusted his glasses on his face, why do these people look as if their souls were just sucked out of their bodies? He asked no one in particular. My apologies, Hidan-san. Tessai said in a stoic manner as he stood in the training ground of Naruto's base of operations. His frame was covered with the marks of battle and the frames of his glasses were cracked by whatever had occurred there. Even his mustache needed a touch-up after what had just occurred. It has been quite a while since I've been in an intense battle. I forgot sparring etiquette and used my higher-level Kido against you. In his defense, Hidan had monstrous Reiatsu and fought like a savage. Nah. Hidan said in a strained voice in his Gigai as he lay on the ground, it was all good. I needed to fight someone tough as an Arankar and if you'd pulled punches I might have cut you in half. It's not your fault my Gigai got in the way. He looked down at his severed left arm, and chunk of his entire left side missing. You can't kill my human body, this hurts like a motherfucker though. A rather brutal spar between Hidan and Tessai ended with only one overwhelming casualty, Hidan's Gigai. He seriously needed to watch where he left that thing around it when he was using his Arankar form, even if it couldn't technically die. Soten Kisshunt Twin Sacred Return Shield, I reject. Hidan then found himself surrounded in the glowing barrier, courtesy of Orihime, and sighed in relief as his injuries began to quickly heal. I know I hate all you pacifist types and everything, but you're alright. When Jashin-sama rises up and takes this world I'll see what I can do to keep you alive, girl. Thank you, Hidan. Apparently Orihime saw that as a perfectly feasible way of someone saying thank you to her. If anything, hanging around while Hidan picked fights with others got her tons of practice at healing, because he would leave his Gigai around haphazardly and it would get annihilated, thus requiring someone to fix it so that he could use it and move around after he was done fighting. Yeah, Hidan definitely liked getting his body put back together this way. Orihime was faster than Kakuzu was unless he was really messed up. She was way nicer about it when she patched him up, and of course the view that he got was immaculate. Even a surly jerk like him had to admit that a pretty girl was way better to look at than an old guy in a mask. Whatever Uzumaki is paying you he needs to pay you more because this healing thing you do is the best I've ever seen. Orihime's face heated prettily at being complimented, especially by someone with such a normally poor disposition like Hidan. Though, the fact that his shoulder was now reattached to his torso by way of her doing probably had something to do with it. It's practice I guess. She said before laughing sheepishly. She was damn sure getting a lot of it, that much was for certain. At hearing that from her, Hidan gave her a very feral grin. Well, if that's the case, then I'll just have to make sure that you get more of it right. She could just put him right back together anyway. All Orihime could do was give him a nervous smile, because she didn't like the sound of that whatsoever. Meanwhile, there was work to be done elsewhere in the training area that was quite busy on this day. Gaara in his stood impassively as another of Chad's energy blasts bounced off of his Shukaku look-alike shield. Once again, barely anything chipped off of the tightly compacted material but did nothing to the overall structural integrity of it. You have to do better than that, Sato-san. Gaara said calmly. Chad stood panting as he stared down the tanuki-looking shield directly in his path. He knew he had put absolutely everything he had into that last blast, so why was it still looking pristine? He saw pieces of it fly away. Little did he know, Gaara was repeatedly reinforcing the shield after every attack Chad gave it. The smoke and dust kicked up from every blast obscured Chad's vision and allowed Gaara to pull up more minerals from the ground to use to reform parts of the shield. Gaara wanted Chad to smash it in one-hit blast though, instead of picking away at it, since if he could do that, there probably wasn't anything he couldn't destroy. It's impossible, Chad thought to himself as he let the armor around his right arm fade, his exhaustion evident by this point. He had been going at trying to destroy Gaara's shield since he exited school that day. It had been like that every day since they had begun to train together. What on earth is that thing made of? Steel. Gaara could see the exhaustion in Chad, having fired nothing but full-powered blasts from his arm ever since the training session had begun, now being well after 9 p.m. And then there was the matter of the fact that the younger members of the little group had homework and the like to take care of. I think we should take a break. Gaara said, not leaving room for any argument as he then disappeared in a sand-based shunshin. He had homework to do as well. Front or not, Gaara was not about to look bad in a public forum for being stupid, like Naruto did by not showing up, sleeping in classes, and not doing homework. Somehow Naruto was still passing, and simultaneously obliterating world history and geography classes. Speaking of Naruto as well, he was working up quite a sweat in a mock battle with Yoruichi, both of them moving fast enough to avoid being flat-out seen by anyone that wasn't used to moving that fast themselves. They would trade strikes in the air and then back away, until Naruto decided to push forward as the aggressor and try to chase Yoruichi down, an attempt to wear her down that was very slow going. Someone's angry. Yoruichi jibed as she hopped backwards and came to a stop just as a fist from Naruto smashed into the ground. Someone's very angry. Is the mission really that bad? Naruto grumbled to himself as he stood up and shook the gravel off of his fist. This isn't a mission. Naruto stated, bouncing on his toes to stay loose. We're on watchdog status. We were doing that before any of this happened at all. Now we just have Jigokucho, hell butterflies, to take care of. Don't forget that we're to take in another group of Shinigami to keep the Seraiti up to date on what's happening in the world of the living. Yoruichi said informatively before ducking a kunai thrown directly at her in response, so that's the thing that you're really pissed off about. She said in a eureka moment. I am not running a goddamn boarding house. Naruto yelled before again rushing Yoruichi swiftly, forcing her to move just as quickly to avoid being overtaken in his attack. Sick of retreating, Yoruichi stopped running and threw a hard punch that met Naruto's own in a heavy smash of fists. We're getting paid way more than this is worth, Naruto. She said as she ignored the thought that she might have broken her hand in that ill-advised clash, so when the Shinigami representatives show up I want you to be good. Be good. I'm the fucking boss around here. Naruto exclaimed, spinning in a grandiose manner. I'll blow this entire base to bits if I feel like it. It's not like it's lined with sekiseki or something. He stopped spinning in time to block a Yoruichi flying kick that sent him sliding back 100 feet away. Do you think we could get sekiseki in here? That last idea actually sounds useful. Yoruichi sprang back off of Naruto's block and smirked at watching him shake his arms out. She might have cracked the bones in them as hard as she kicked him. Nope, can't bring it through any portal. All we've got here is the stuff you humans came up with over the last few thousands of years. She finished with a grin. Cocky aren't we? Naruto quipped as he could already feel him bones starting to slowly heal. Before he could initiate another attack, a voice stopped him. Naruto-sensei, how do I pop this damn water balloon? Tatsuki shouted across the training room, holding said water balloon in one hand. Spinning the water doesn't work. This was an extremely troublesome technique to get down, but the Rasengan was sure to be worth it in the end. It was definitely the strongest fighting technique she ever had the opportunity to learn. Patience was not her strong suit though. Naruto took his eyes off of Yoruichi to address his student who had interrupted his fight. Yes, it will. You're just doing it wrong. He shouted back. Then tell me how to do it right. Tatsuki said with a snarl in her voice. In the blink of an eye, Naruto was right in front of her with a frown on his face, surprising her and making her take a step back as he stared at her. Show me. Naruto said, before grunting and suddenly blocking another flying kick from Yoruichi. Give me a second, Yoruichi-chan, damn. I'm trying to teach here. Yoruichi merely chuckled and jumped back from her attempted surprise attack to land in a crouch, a predatory look in her eyes as if she was looking for another sneak opening. You never said timeout, she more or less purred. But even if he had indeed said timeout, she wouldn't have listened anyway. Naruto kept an eye on Yoruichi but was still watching Tatsuki as she tried to pop the balloon by spinning the water in it with her chakra. He could see the water only churning in one direction and took the balloon from her. Pay attention because I'm only doing this one more time. What's the difference between when you do it and when I do it? He asked before spinning the water with his chakra, quickly bursting the balloon. Tatsuki growled slightly when the water from the balloon splashed on her. It looked like the water was churning instead of just sloshing around when I did it. Am I supposed to spin the water in more than one direction? She asked as she walked away to a nearby pile of water balloons to get a new one. Naruto grinned at the fact that she picked up on what to do and was about to open his mouth when he sensed Yoruichi again induct a swinging kick aimed at his head. Alright, that's it. Jinten. Menkobushi, swift release. 10,000 fists. Naruto leapt at Yoruichi and threw punches so fast she couldn't even see them. Wow. She thought as Naruto's punches actually sent her in a full retreat. Yoruichi could feel her forearms taking all of the punishment from the repeated strikes that she swore could pulverize rock into pebbles. That's a new one. Meanwhile though, Tatsuki was lamenting the loss of one-on-one time with her new and very powerful mentor and was none too happy about it. Can you two stop playing around for 5 minutes so I can get some help here? She wished she was fast enough to chase them down, but Naruto didn't teach her how to do that yet. She couldn't even see Naruto or Yoruichi most of the time and she didn't ever think she'd be that fast. Pop the goddamn balloon. Naruto yelled, splitting his attention between his student and his opponent. What else do you want me to say or do? I'm in a fight here, damn it. Naruto turned back to Yoruichi fully to find her kneeling down with both hands on the ground, a grin firmly on her face. And what do you think you're? Bakudo number 21. Sekientant way of binding number 21. Red smoke escape. From Yoruichi's hands on the ground, a massive plume of red smoke burst up, engulfing herself and Naruto. After a moment the smoke cleared and revealed Naruto in a ready stance all by himself without Yoruichi anywhere in sight. Damn it, Naruto muttered to himself, scratching his whisker marks. Sensing Yoruichi's Reiatsu was always a pain and he didn't want to get caught off guard in another sneak attack, if she was even still there at all. There was always a chance that she had just gotten bored and left altogether. Still, free time was free time, and with that he turned towards Tatsuki. Now pop the balloon and I'm not answering another question until you do. I'm not here to spoon feed you the way to do things. Tatsuki stared at him and then at the balloon in her hand before glaring at it in focus as the water started to churn. Once again, Naruto had to say that her control was way better than his when he took to learning the Rasengan because she only needed one hand to begin the process of moving the water in multiple directions. After a few seconds the balloon popped, putting a look of elation on Tatsuki's face as she had finally gotten the step down. I did it. It only took a few days. She was about to break into a full-on celebration when she caught a rubber ball that was thrown right at her. What the hell is this now? Pop that. Naruto said, amused at how he had cut off her little celebration. He could see why Jiraiya used to do it to him all the time when he thought he had accomplished something. It was actually kind of hilarious to see her expression change. It's not a water balloon this time, it's a rubber ball. They make the rubber out of lower quality stuff than when I had to do this step, so it should actually be easier for you to pop it. He stifled a laugh when the look of concentration on her face bore no fruit by way of the ball popping. Tatsuki tried spinning the chakra in the ball in a similar way, getting no positive reaction from the orb. How am I supposed to pop this thing? Do I spin my chakra the other way? What's the trick this time? Power. Naruto answered her question in a straightforward manner. Your chakra needs to be as intense as you can make it to pop the ball. You've got to do it in a completely different way this time to learn how to make the Rasengan strong enough to do actual damage to the stuff you hit with it. Getting the point, Tatsuki went back to focusing on the rubber ball in her hand, grunting loudly in exertion as she tried to will her chakra to burst the ball from the inside. Naruto began escorting Tatsuki back over to the others as it was time to shoo the high school students on home. That's the way Tatsuki-chan. Bully the chakra out. Now it was time to see how long it took her to get this step down. XXX. The next day, Karakura High School. In an empty classroom, Naruto, Gaara, Orihime, Tatsuki, Chad, and Ryu sat down to listen to what the Quincy of the group had to say about what he had recently found and had tried to take to Urahara and had failed. You found people with their souls sucked out, and couldn't sense anything else? Chad asked, not seeing how those two things could have gone together. If it was an Arankar we could sense them, couldn't we? The surefire advantage they had was that they weren't going to be snuck up on by the Arankar. Naruto grimaced at the thought. He was no stranger to espionage, but he figured that he had a handle on making sure that he could feel the Arankar in order to prevent any sneak attacks. But this didn't seem like an Arankar thing. Why would they attract even the slightest amount of attention by killing normal people if they were really trying to stay hidden in their infiltration of Karakura town? When is Ichigo coming back anyway? Tatsuki asked, trying to interject in the conversation as she was still trying to pop the rubber ball in her hand. He's been gone for more than a week. It wasn't nearly as long as being gone for the entire summer break, but a week was still a week and that was quite a while to go without hearing from someone. Naruto addressed this fact. He's still training with the people me and Urahara set him up with, but I'm thinking I might have to spring him soon. Me and Urahara can oversee the rest of his training on our own. Now don't worry about his training, worry about your own. Pop that ball, damn it. He demanded, getting Tatsuki to grumble and curse under her breath at him. According to the Visoreds, Ichigo had managed to obtain control over his hollow. Now it was just a matter of him learning how to fight and keep the mask that represented his hollow powers on his face to augment his already formidable abilities. Right now all he could do was keep it on for only a handful of seconds. So theoretically he could go and get Ichigo and bring him back to normal living, well, as normal as things got for Ichigo anyway. Still, he was not feeling up to dealing with getting bitched out by Shinji or Hiyori. It would probably be best to send a clone if he decided to get Ichigo back. The way things sounded, Orihime didn't necessarily like the thought of fighting someone without the entire crew present and assembled, so to speak. So, what are we going to do? She asked rather meekly. It was like a war room, except it was just a classroom. Ichigo is fine on his own. Gaara insisted calmly, he is with those that are training him. They are most certainly not weak, thus this incident won't touch them. Naruto stroked his chin in thought. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but Wonder Boy needs more seasoning. Besides, we need to see what he's gotten out of all of his training anyway. Once we know what we're dealing with, I'm calling him back. There was no need to yank him out of his current training regiment prematurely before they even knew what they were facing. Gaara then rocketed out another immediate question, you going to call the Seraiti? Fuck no. Naruto replied instantly, they're already sending people. Why would I call them now? It's not like telling Yamamoto Gigi that this is happening and we don't what exactly. This would make them send anyone any faster. He was going to save some face here and stay on top of the situation. Equilibrium was not going to look like they didn't know what they were doing only days after being recognized as a significant force by the Seraiti. Ryu frowned deeply as he tried to brainstorm. We can't sense them, well at least I can't. Not until I felt a little spike of Reiatsu. He rubbed the bridge of his nose under his glasses. When I arrived I found the bodies that had lost their souls. It was clear that he was relenting over the loss of his powers, even though there was nothing he could really do about that fact. There had to be a way to find out just what was going on and to locate the culprit immediately. His sensing skills weren't very strong to search for things over a distance until he took the time to use Sage Mo. Naruto immediately stood up and walked out of the room, getting everyone's attention at how abrupt the action was. Where are you going, Naruto? Chad asked, thinking that there might be some trouble that needed to be handled. To go be your living radar system. Naruto snapped as he reached the door just when the teacher opened it back up to come inside, ready to continue class. Uzumaki-san, the lunch period is almost over. She said with her hands on her hips. Where do you think you're going? Blinking at the woman blocking his path, Naruto set his hands on her shoulders and calmly yet swiftly switched their positions, with him standing in the doorway and her standing in the classroom, bathroom. Yeah, I'm going to the bathroom for this stomach virus I caught. You don't want me anywhere near here for that, so. He then took off down the hall in a rush. Later. The teacher let out a sigh as she looked down the hall where she swore she could see scuff marks from the rubber soles on Naruto's shoes lining the floor where he ran. I swear I have the strangest students in my class. First Kurosaki running off at the drop of a hat, and then Uzumaki never shows up and leaves at a whim. XXX. Visored's hideout. Training ground. Come on, you dumbass. Hiyori yelled as an incoming attack from Ichigo was easily defended. Her reason for being upset was his slow-moving growth when it came to using his hollow mask. 11 seconds just isn't going to cut it in an actual fight. She shouted as she delivered a kick to Ichigo's face to drive the point home. Ichigo got back to his feet and glared, scuff marks all over his face from the kick he had just taken. I know that. He shouted back as he rubbed his face. Why did all of the short people in his life find it so necessary to inflict copious amounts of gratuitous violence on him? First Rukia and now Hiyori. I'm trying to hold it as best as I can, so shut up and let me work. Hiyori gave him a deadpan look before bringing her hand up to her face, her own mask with the prominent horn on the forehead taking form. Well, if you still want to get your ass kicked, that's just fine with me. She said in her slightly distorted voice, warped by the power of the hollow flowing through her. Bring it on. With that welcome invitation, Ichigo formed his own mask and leapt back at her with a yell of malicious intent. Meanwhile, like usual, the other Visoreds were hanging out to the side, not paying much attention, if any at all, to the current fight going on. 11 seconds is a shoddy amount of time to keep the mask on for. Kensai remarked to himself as he was the only one really paying attention to Ichigo and Hiyori's little scrap. I mean, first of all, the guy took longer than Hiyori to get his hollow under control, and now this. Shinji shrugged upon hearing his comrade's complaints. Hey, at least he's not a dud. He pulled it off in the end, didn't he? He did agree though. 11 seconds was hilariously bad. That didn't mean that there wasn't room for improvement though, and Ichigo certainly was impressive. Wait, do we have to pay Naruto? Because he said that we owed him, but he never said what we owed him. Rose sat off, tuning his guitar calmly. Are you kidding? He said with a laugh. None of us have money. What are we going to pay him with? All of the useless stuff we've got laying around the place. Lisa shook her head as she read a small orange book intently. If we don't pay him somehow, then Naruto's going to get us back. Shinji laughed loudly at the idea of Naruto getting them back. Get us back. How in the hell would he ever pull that one off? There's a barrier over the entire hideout and we never really leave. Good luck with that. Love rubbed his stubbly chin as he thought about what was being said. Well, Naruto is thousands of years old and he's strong. Really strong. We actually don't even know how strong he is, but that's not even really important. He's like an old man, and old men are wily and conniving. Even if he doesn't try to beat us up, which would be stupid trying to do that to all of us at once, everyone in earshot nodded in agreement. That indeed would have been very stupid, but even if he doesn't try that, I still think he could do something to get us back because he keeps saying that he doesn't work for free. Or friends with fishcake though. Mashiro interjected brightly, don't we get some kind of friend discount for his services, or even better, a freebie? Love shook his spiky afroed head firmly. Naruto says, if you want a handout, call the United Nations, because I don't fight for free. So no, he doesn't do freebies, unless we really need it. And they certainly didn't need his help to get Ichigo, it was just more convenient that way. Maybe we can pay him in installments. XXX. Late evening, with Naruto. Karakura town needs skyscrapers, Naruto remarked to himself offhandedly. He was seated in a meditative position atop the highest building in town that he could find, which coincidentally wasn't that high at all. Several stories wasn't nearly high enough for him to get a good vantage position from. If he had been higher, he could have easily sensed the slightest disturbance of energy amongst all of the people in town. Now he had to focus intensely to distinguish between the unfamiliar and minute signatures of all of the townspeople assaulting his senses. He could clearly feel two particular signatures that were moving towards him rapidly. Still, he didn't stand up and prepare to defend himself because both signatures had a hint of familiarity. Both of them, though he didn't know who they were, felt similar to two other people that he did in fact know quite well. So you're the one producing that strange reiatsu that I've been feeling around Karakura town for months. A man wearing a plain gray suit with a light blue undershirt and tie adorned with blue crosses on it said in a cool manner from behind Naruto. He had silver hair and brown eyes along with a pair of glasses on his face. You're not a Shinigami, but I don't particularly know what you are. The way he spoke was in a manner that Naruto found similar to Ryu, and his energy felt like a Quincy, also like Ryu's since he was the only Quincy Naruto knew anyway. That's me, Uzumaki Naruto, at your service. Naruto said, still sitting in meditative position, eyes shut to help him feel the energy around Karakura town. Ryu's dad. It's nice to meet you. He said in an honestly pleasant manner. I'd get up to shake your hand and introduce myself the right way, but I'm kind of on the lookout for something right now. Ryu's father simply stared at Naruto's back with his arms crossed. You're radiating energy like a living beacon. The same energy I've felt around Ryu repeatedly. You're correct, I am Ryu's father. I am Ishida Ryukin. He looked over to the side and paused for the moment, and I'm apparently not the only person that wishes to have words with you. He seemed to be waiting for something, and that something appeared moments later in a blur right next to Ryukin on the rooftop. It was a man wearing a Shinigami uniform, but he had a captain's haori attached to the back of a small piece of armor on his left shoulder. He was a tall man with spiky black hair and brown eyes. He had a stubble beard and was looking between Naruto and Ryukin. You're late, Isshin. Ryukin said matter-of-factly. If he had wanted to leave and if I weren't here he could have disappeared before you managed to make it from your clinic. Isshin let out a slight growl. Well, excuse me, some of us have kids that we don't need knowing that we do this, so I had to make my own opening. He then turned his attention to Naruto. I've felt your signature around Ichigo quite a bit since right before the summer began. It's not really my style to pry into my son's life and all of that, but I don't really know a thing about you. And you're very strong, so forgive me if I don't feel safe leaving Ichigo in your hands. Naruto grinned without moving otherwise, not that they could even see it. I'd like to say that I'm Ichigo's boss, but since he hasn't really done anything for me yet I can't. Same for Ryu, but he actually has done some work for me. Even without his powers the guy keeps his ear to the ground just in case. Boss. Isshin said questioningly. Boss for what? Ichigo isn't with the Seraiti unless you count the substitute Shinigami thing, which I don't. Ryukin's eyes hardened almost unnoticeably at hearing the words, Seraiti, used in conjuncture of anything to do with his son. Ryu knows not to show his back to anyone having anything to do with Shinigami. His own mistake in going there this summer and losing his powers was his choice, however. Letting out a sigh, Naruto decided that it was time to explain to the parents what was going on. What a bother. I am a part of a group that is tasked with watching over this neck of the world of the living. I'm just a normal human being, that's not really normal at all. Just like Ichigo and Ryu's friends, only not anything like any of them at all. He then realized how contradictory that sounded. Does any of that make sense? Isshin nodded stiffly. You're not a soul, you're a living being. And you're like those other children that are touched with powers, only you're not touched. Everything you're capable of is all yours. Close enough. Naruto replied earnestly, but I pay Ryu for him working with me, and I'll pay Ichigo too if he ever starts. We're a really small group. You must be hurting for help if you believe my son is a useful commodity to your efforts. Ryukin said succinctly. Without his powers he's just a sitting duck waiting to be taken down. He shouldn't be meddling in the affairs of the dead. Nothing good comes of it. He should focus on protecting the living if he feels he should protect anything. Nothing's going to happen to Ryu. Naruto said determinedly. Powers or not. He then switched gears, and who's to say he can't do both? I've been doing one for years. As far as I'm concerned, protecting the other isn't that different from one, it's just weirder. And that wasn't even by very much in Naruto's opinion. Nothing he had seen since he had begun to deal with the dead had been that far out of his realm of normalcy thus far. Isshin stepped forward. So does that mean you know where Ichigo happens to be right now? Ichigo's training with some friends of mine, but I'm about to get him and bring him back any day now. Naruto felt alright with telling Isshin this because he didn't exactly seem to be a Seraiti-sanctioned Shinigami either. Besides, he was the kid's dad, there wasn't an issue of telling him that much since he couldn't find the Visoreds without already knowing where to look. He'll be back, sulking all over your house in no time. Naruto assured Isshin. Until then Khan's filling in for him. A nod that Naruto couldn't see came from Isshin, the mod soul inside of his body. I know. At that moment, Naruto's eyes snapped open, revealing the telltale eyes of Sage Mode to finally take in the low light of the nearly set sun, and he jumped to his feet, nearly alarming Isshin, who had been closest to him. I'd love to talk to you guys some more, but I have to go. I've got a hunt to get to. Sorry, he said before running towards the edge of the building and jumping off without fanfare. This left the two older men standing atop the building alone. Ryukin was the first to comment. That's one strange young man. He then saw Isshin shaking his head. What the matter with you? He asked as he calmly placed a cigarette in his mouth. There's nothing young about that guy. Isshin said with a slight chuckle. That Reiatsu is grizzled. No young man or young anything has an aura like that. XXX. Urahara shop. Early nightfall. I don't see how this is a good idea. Hidan said abruptly as he sat at Urahara's table, staring up at what he had come over to check out in the stead of Yoruichi, who was manning the base waiting for the arrival of the Shinigami meant to stay with them for the time being, and Naruto, who was off playing early warning radar in town. He thought it would have something to do with Nell, but the childlike Arankar was as normal as ever, and to make things annoying for Hidan, she was no longer afraid of him since by now she knew he would not hurt her. Thus he was now in playmate realm. As far as she was concerned, aren't those things illegal? He asked, trying to ignore Nell climbing up his back as he pointed at the three figures standing behind Urahara. Opening his fan in amusement to Hidan's reaction, Urahara let out a chuckle. Well, check out the big brain on Hidan. I guess Naruto or Yoruichi drilled into your head what was legal and illegal in this world to make sure you didn't do something you shouldn't. Hidan grumbled in response, but Urahara simply went ahead with why he called someone from Naruto's base to come over, say hello to Noba, Kuroto, and Ririn. Mod souls that I've created. He also did not acknowledge that yes, they were illegal by the standards of the Soul Society. Noba seemed to be a young man wearing a fur coat and a blue undersuit that went up into a zippered mask that was open to reveal red bangs of his hair and blue eyes. On his back he had a blue shield. Kuroto was a man that had glasses, a small mustache, and long hair that was half blonde and half black. He wore a gray tie and top hat and had on a multicolored suit that was gray, black, and red in places. Ririn was a small young woman with short blonde hair and bright blue eyes. She wore a long pink coat with fur trimming the edges and over that a black cloak of some sort along with high red boots. Hidan just stared at them dryly, still ignoring Nell, who was marveling at his slick-backed hair at the moment. Yeah, I don't say hello, unless I'm saying hello, I'm about to kill you. So I'm not going to be doing that shit. Why am I here, damn it? They weren't even feeding him, so he wasn't getting anything out of this trip. He really was Naruto's gopher, wasn't he? He thought he should have been more upset over that fact than he actually was. What a brute. Kuroto said before paling slightly when Hidan turned his head towards him to give him the collected killer blank stare. We're meant to help you. He managed to stammer out through Hidan's unintentional, killing intent. Hidan cocked an eyebrow. Help us what? He asked, finally prying Nell off of his head and holding her in front of his face. Stop. He said sternly, only getting an amused laugh from the small girl. He rolled his eyes and put Nell down before turning his attention back to the new people he hadn't met yet. But yeah, what do we need help with? Urahara pointed right at Hidan. You completely suck at sensing anything less than the most blunt outpouring of energy. He could sense Hidan's Reiatsu spike angrily at the blunt declaration. You know it's true. That's not going to work because of the very special reishi that constitutes your new enemy's energy. It's almost like they're not using any at all, you could never find it. Fuck you. Hidan said dully, but he knew that was true, we have new enemies. What happened to the Arankar of that Aizen jerk that we fought not too long ago? His tone switched to one of excitement. New enemies meant he would probably get to fight. Fighting meant he might get to kill someone other than the drone-like hollows that he usually tore apart whenever he decided to go to Hueco Mundo. Urahara shrugged and scratched his head underneath his hat. They haven't tried anything since the last attack. We can feel when a Garganta is torn into the world of the living, well nothing like that has happened this time. This is a completely new enemy. Ririn said before pointing to herself, a confident smile on her face. Luckily we can locate the ones that you're supposed to be looking for now easily. So suffice it to say, you'd be lost without us. Hidan just stared them all down blankly before grabbing Nell and putting her on his shoulder. Downstairs now. Let's see how lost I'd be without once I see what use you three are. And with that, Hidan marched downstairs taking Nell along for the ride. Why he did so he had no idea, but it seemed like a good idea. Pay close attention kid. He said to Nell, you're about to see Hidan Ojisan kick some upstart ass. Once he arrived downstairs however he paused mid-step, seeing that Ririn, Noba, and Urahara were all down there, seemingly waiting on them. Hidan looked back at the ladder he had just climbed down and over at the mod souls, fighting the urge to ask them how the hell they got down there so fast. He opened his mouth to speak when he heard a familiar voice speak behind him that froze him cold. Hidan, I give you a job to do and then I find you picking a fight when I come to check up on you. Hidan turned around to see the form of Yoruichi giving him a stern look. What do you have to say for yourself? Hidan was prepared to defend himself verbally but stopped and simply stared at Yoruichi before placing Nell on the ground. I say that you're not Yoruichi. He yelled as he pulled his cylinder from around his neck and extended it to its full pike form to launch himself at Yoruichi. Just as his feet left the ground from his direct attack, a red field appeared behind Yoruichi, with Noba inside of it. The Yoruichi copycat jumped inside, forcing Hidan's brazen attack to miss. Noba and the copy of Yoruichi wound up standing back with Ririn and Urahara, the red field from before having dissipated from their previous use. Hidan scoffed at his miss without turning back around to face them. I'm slower in my Gigai. Let's see you try that again. He said as he stabbed himself with his pike and ejected his soul from the body, leaving him in his Arankar form. As he turned around to face off with the three mod souls he was slightly taken aback as the normal Baron, mountainous training ground was no longer in view. Instead he found himself standing inside of what looked to be the inner workings of a large clock. He quickly drew his scythe and held it at the ready, licking his lips in anticipation. In a speedy motion, the body of the Yoruichi copy appeared behind Hidan, but Hidan merely turned and blocked with his scythe, grinning madly as he did so. Yeah, you're not Yoruichi. You're fast, but not Yoruichi fast. And that kick would have at least made me move if it had actually been her. Nice try though, he said, shoving the fake Yoruichi off. You don't fight like her either. The Yoruichi copy smirked deviously. How'd you know I wasn't Yoruichi-san before we even really fought? Yoruichi wouldn't have said anything to me first if she was really upset with what I did. Hidan said with a deadpan expression. She would have kicked the shit out of me first, then she would have said something. Now please let me bifurcate you in peace. Hidan said before vanishing with a low boom, a sign of his use of sonido. Yoruichi seemed to sweat slightly when Hidan began to move, and the follow-up attempt to keep up with him nearly failed because as Hidan said, this person wasn't as fast as the real Yoruichi. It wasn't even close, and Hidan's scythe came close to cutting the enemy in two. Noba. The fake Yoruichi called out as Hidan cocked his fist back, allowing red energy to form around it. Bala, hollow bullet. Hidan launched the projectile energy attack just as Noba landed in front of the false Yoruichi and created another red field to block the attack from hitting both of them. Hidan's bala flew into the field and disappeared right before he felt something strike him in his back and explode, knocking him to the ground on his face. He pulled himself up to see Noba standing in front of what used to be a copy of Yoruichi. Now Kuroto, what the hell? This guy is way too strong for us. Kuroto said looking at Hidan warily. I can't copy enough of what Yoruichi-san can do to be a threat to him in an actual fight. I'm glad you realize that. Hidan said in a seething voice, angry that somehow his own bala wound up being fired at himself. Now please die for me. Hidan held up one hand in a half-tiger seal and formed a purple sero in his other hand, prepared to just fire and obliterate them the second one of them made a wrong move. Kuroda took a step back. Noba, redirect that would you? Noba spoke his first words as the masked mod soul looked at Hidan's energy blast warily. I'm not sure I can. Bakudo number 61. Raikujukoyura way of binding number 61. 6 rods prison of light. 6 yellow beams of light slammed into Hidan's body on all sides and froze him in place. Oh goddamn it. Not again. Let me out Urahara or you're next. I can't let you blow the mod souls to hell Hidan. Urahara said, walking into sight from seemingly nowhere. You can let the illusion fall now Ririn. At his request, the scene changed and returned back to the barren training ground it had been in the first place. Ririn then popped up from behind a rock. Oh, and I was just about to give that Hidan a hit he'd never forget. She said as she moved over to the amassed mod souls, Shinigami scientist, and trapped Arankar. Urahara let go of the fucking Kido. Hidan snapped again. Oh you're so lucky I can't go resurrection on your ass without tipping off the Shinigami. Because there's no way in hell this flimsy shit would hold me then. Just being pissed wasn't a good enough reason to unload his full power as if it were a toy. His Reiatsu wasn't exactly subtle even in his normal Arankar form. Ignoring Hidan's ranting, Urahara gestured to the mod souls. Well at least now you've seen that they're not just for sensing your new enemies. Noba can teleport anywhere he wants and can even teleport ranged attacks like your Bala. Kuroda can shapeshift into any person's appearance and can take on their voice, he can even mimic some of their abilities to use in combat. Ririn can make illusions to fool opponents, she was just a little nervous to do anything more than change the battlefield appearance after you let your Reiatsu loose. I wasn't scared or anything. Ririn said in a manner of flimsy defense, I just thought that Noba and Kuroda were better suited to handle you, that's all. Just as she said that, Urahara dropped his Kidu's hold over Hidan and the Arankar appeared in front of Ririn, leaning down to get in her face, stopping her statement in her tracks. Boo. Hidan said plainly, getting a satisfied look on his face when Ririn shrieked and jumped back behind Urahara. He let out a cruel chuckle and looked at Urahara. How do you keep making stuff like this? He asked. You must be burning through your pay to afford what you need. Not as much as you'd think. Urahara said with a laugh before getting somewhat serious, especially since I actually know what we're up against with this new threat you found. I want you to bring these guys to Yoruichi at your base and tell her that we've got bounce to deal with. XXX. With Naruto. Underneath a darkened bridge, Naruto stared down at the body of a person with their soul drained, just like Ryu said, if he hadn't been in sage mode, thus making him extra sensitive towards the energy of all living creatures that he could sense, he would never had felt the tiny amount of a normal person's spirit begin to vanish. He was too late to save the person though, as he hadn't been anywhere near the signature when it began to drop off. Backing away from the deceased civilian, Naruto ran a hand through his hair and let out a sigh that turned into a growl before he began to walk back onto the streets from under the bridge. He was still dressed in his school garb since he hadn't gone back to base before taking up his position sitting and waiting on some suspicious activity to take place. I've got to get a handle on this quick, there's no way I can let this kind of thing keep happening as long as I'm here to do something about it. Taking care of things like this were the entire reason he was able to accept his own existence, thus it irked him intensely that people were still dying around him. As he continued to walk onwards aimlessly, wondering if he should try again to locate and attack with Sage Mode, a soft song began to fill his mind. It was a rather calming one that he hadn't heard for hundreds of years, one that he remembered particularly liking, thus he allowed himself to let his mind drift if only for a moment. A moment turned out to be far longer than he thought, as when he regained his bearings Naruto found himself standing out in front of an abandoned hospital, only one single person in the vicinity standing in front of him. Damn genjutsu. I fucking hate being hypnotized. He thought to himself, his muscles tensing in response to the sight of the shadowy figure standing in front of him. Even though whatever had happened to him wasn't genjutsu, it didn't change the fact that whatever had happened had been akin to it, and he despised the indirect arts of combat. Needless to say, after being suckered along for what he had presumed to be miles, Naruto was ready for a fight. The shadowy figure slowly walked forward into the moonlight in Naruto's sight. It was a woman with brown hair, brown eyes, and red lipstick. She was very attractive, but Naruto didn't care much about looks when someone was about to attack him. She wore an olive-colored collared shirt and a red tie with a brown vest over it as well as black pants and shoes. On her right hand was silver bracelet and on her left hand was a silver claw on her middle finger. The thing was though, that she was looking at Naruto as if she had seen a ghost. Her face was almost pale at the sight of him and her mouth was slightly agape in shock. She then schooled her features when she realized that Naruto was still set for battle. "You don't remember me, do you?" she said with a slight laugh, though her face was far from amused. "Maybe I do, maybe I don't," Naruto said, ready for action and debating the merits of rushing in or getting his distance depending on how this person fought. "I've been around for a while, so refresh my memory." "Yes, quite a while," the woman said quietly before narrowing her eyes in a glare on him. "Try around 250 years. Namikaze Naruto," she spat spitefully. Naruto's eyes snapped wide open at hearing that name used. He had repeatedly changed his name throughout his life and that had been the one he had kept for the longest time. He hadn't gone by that name since it became a habit for international records to be kept, thus he began switching between more diverse names than his mother and father's surnames. But 250 years. Who the hell did he know 250 years ago that would actually be alive and remember who he was? No, forgetting that, if this woman knew him 250 years ago, then how on earth was she even alive in the first place? He wasn't even able to legitimately see complete souls until around 50 or 60 years ago, so it wasn't that. And this was a living, breathing woman, which meant that she was just that back then. How the hell does anyone that knows who I am exist for that long? Naruto thought to himself before speaking. How do you know that name and who are you? Why are you attacking people? I thought you were dead. At first I thought there was no way it was really you. The woman said lowly, blatantly ignoring his questions, and then I thought that I was currently standing in front of a strong descendant. But no, I don't know how, but you're actually him. You're Naruto. And yet you're not a bound. You're a sage, correct? Am I still right about that? Naruto had no clue what a bound was, but it was now abundantly clear that this lady knew who he was. Hey. Answer my questions, he demanded heatedly. The woman calmly closed her eyes, ignoring Naruto's outburst. If you don't remember my face, then I doubt you remember my name, but I'll give it to you anyway before I send you to hell for abandoning me, Naruto. My name is Yoshino, Soma Yoshino. At that, Naruto started racking his brain trying to think of anyone named Yoshino that would have any reason to know who he was, but he was drawing a blank. Unfortunately for him, he was given no more time to ponder the identity of the woman that knew him as she drew her single finger claw to her bracelet with a hateful look in her eyes. Zage Dick, Gerda, show yourself, Gerda. The moment she scraped her bracelet with the claw and formed a spark in doing so, a fire formed in an arc above her head before rapidly spreading all over the area. A humanoid figure of fire and magma appeared in front of Yoshino with fire for hands below its forearms and fire for legs beneath the knee area. Having dealt with Yamamoto's Zanpakuto, Naruto wasn't that far removed from dealing with oppressive heat, but even still the flames from whatever Yoshino had just done were making him sweat. Who the hell are you, Yoshino? Naruto thought to himself right before the fire construct rushed at him to attack. Something was starting to nag at him about the face of the woman that was opposing him though, and what are you not telling me that I should know? The attack of Yoshino's fire creature Gerda came quickly at Naruto as the blonde shinobi was ready to react in a hurry. It was a good thing that he did because on Yoshino's direction, Gerda's first move was to fire a jet of flames at Naruto, who quickly dodged and formed 5 Bunshin to test the waters. Upon getting close enough to Gerda to strike, only one clone was able to lay a hand on Gerda as it landed a punch, however this only wound up with the clone burning itself and dispelling. The other attacking clones were then destroyed by a torrent of flame that came from the fiery figure. It stands to reason that you have powers of your own, especially if you've lived this long. Yoshino commented after seeing Naruto's Bunshin technique. Too bad it won't be enough. Gerda once again attacked headlong in an attempt to burn Naruto alive with a jet of flame directed right at him. Come on, who did I know or meet in the last 200 years that actually had powers and could do anything like this? Naruto thought to himself as he jumped into the air and dodged the fire by sticking to the side of the outside wall of the abandoned hospital. The anger she had in her eyes directed at him made him desperately want to know who this woman was supposed to be to him, but for now he was in a fight. If I can take out her fiery little friend, then I can think about who she is for as long as I want to. With that in mind, Naruto pulled out the hilt of the Raijin no Ken, sword of the Thunder God, and extended the glowing yellow blade with his chakra, prepared to cut through whatever he had to. Gerda rushed at Naruto and attempted a flaming punch that missed and wound up smashing a hole through the wall Naruto had just been standing on. This was a mistake that was not allowed to be rectified as Naruto cleaved straight through Gerda, refucating the fiery humanoid creature and letting it drop to the ground in a heap. He's so fast. Yoshino thought as she barely saw Naruto stop moving long enough to cut through Gerda before he disappeared from view again and reappeared 10 feet away from her. It hurts to be forgotten Naruto, but as a Bount I'm actually pretty used to such a thing. Tell me how you know who I am. Naruto demanded with hard eyes. Your little fire thing isn't getting back up, so I want some answers here. What exactly did I do to you? Yoshino merely let out a bitter laugh in response. My dear doll, Gerda isn't that easy to defeat. You can't destroy him like that, he'll just regenerate. Almost as if it was in response to her very words, a large blast of fire erupted from behind Naruto and engulfed his entire body. The shocked look on his face was the last thing Yoshino managed to see from him before her doll covered him in flames. I really don't think you can do the same thing even if you have lived this long. Shinra Tensei, subjugation of the omnipresent god. With that call of the specialized ninjutsu, the flames were forced away with a massive burst of gravity that seemed to shove it aside, leaving Naruto standing there with his school clothes singed and partially burnt and light burn marks on his person. They were already healing though as he stared her down with his Rinnegan active and out. You'd be pretty surprised if you think I can't. He extended his sword hand towards Yoshino and made a come hither gesture with his index and middle fingers, Bansho Tenon, heavenly attraction of all creation. Yoshino found her body suddenly pulled towards Naruto as the man cocked his free hand back to deliver a punch, but before she was pulled in far enough to take the hit, Gerda grabbed her and snatched her up out of Naruto's gravitational pull. Not willing to let them get off scot-free, Naruto jumped after them and wound up getting above them before delivering a hard kick to the back of Gerda, sending both the doll and the Bount crashing to the ground. Gerda turned so that he was able to cradle and protect Yoshino during the crash as his fire and magma body dragged a hot trench through the ground. Yoshino got herself up from Gerda's protection and glared at Naruto before he vanished from sight again. Gerda jumped back up and unleashed a rush of flames that went up in a ball that surrounded himself and Yoshino. Naruto stopped himself from trying to force his way through the ball lest he get himself burned again and slip into a trap. A grumble escaped Naruto's lips, and there's no water around here for me to use to put this bastard's flames out. He'd never pull enough immediate moisture from the atmosphere to create any jutsu strong enough to extinguish Gerda, and ripping up the ground to find a water pipe was out of the question even if he had the time to search for one. From the large defensive ball of fire, smaller, yet still very large, fireballs flew Naruto's way, forcing him to spring back out of the way of danger. A fireball that got too close to Naruto was kept away when Naruto took the Raijin no Ken and batted it away like a softball, sending it exploding into the side of the nearby abandoned hospital. The area of the battlefield was turning into something of a fire pit. It's time to show you how a master uses this thing, Naruto said, holding the Raijin no Ken out and moving his free hand underneath the bottom of the hilt, forcing another glowing yellow blade to extend, now giving twin blades on both ends of the hilt. Naruto began rotating the sword rapidly as lightning began to crackle off of the weapon and it became a spinning yellow blur. He held the spinning weapon above his head and thunder began to sound in the sky, Raiju, lightning beast. A bolt of lightning struck the weapon from the sky and reflected back up in a multiple branching pattern. From the sky, larger bolts of lightning started spontaneously hitting the ground along the battlefield, This forced Gerda to release his defensive fireball before it wound up being struck by lightning and assisted Yoshino in dodging the attacks while Naruto just held still and seemed to be directing the mostly wild lightning by spinning his sword above his head and keeping his powerful eyes locked onto Yoshino and Gerda. Yoshino separated from Gerda as Naruto's lightning eventually struck the doll of fire and began battering it mercilessly with electricity in an attempt to utterly destroy it. The force of the lightning jutsu eventually turned Gerda into rubble, at which point Naruto finally stopped spinning the Raijin no Ken and let his jutsu drop. There, regenerate that. Well, since you asked so nicely. Yoshino said as Gerda did just that right before Naruto's eyes, reforming as if Naruto had never pulverized the doll with repeated strokes of lightning from the sky. You walked away and you never even said goodbye. I thought you were better than that. She said bitterly. I thought you understood what it meant to not belong, and now that I know that you survived this long without aging a day, it makes me hate you even more. Hearing that from Yoshino got Naruto to grit his teeth angrily as he had been racking his brain trying to figure out how she knew him. I never even hung around anyone long enough for them to remember anything about me. The last time I ever even stopped anywhere long enough for any person to be friends with me was in Germany. His eyes then widened at the spark of memory that ripped through his head. No, I do know you. He didn't know what else to say other than that. When he knew Yoshino, she definitely didn't have powers, at least none that he could sense. She was just a lonely woman that he met in a Prussian village that somehow got attached to him during the repeated wars around the German area in the mid-1700s. He wound up leaving in a failed attempt to try and prevent the 7 Years' War from beginning and stayed busy in subsequent attempts to end it, which had also failed. Ensuing attempts to do so wound up blacklisting him from basically all of Europe as an urban legend and criminal, forcing him to leave for Far East Asia, Japan in particular, until the 1850s. It took you long enough, didn't it? Yoshino said tauntingly with her hands on her hips. I waited for you to come back, but you never did. I waited so long that the people around me clearly aged while I stayed the same, and they chased me away as if I were a monster. I wanted to die myself as much as they wanted me dead. You were the only person I felt comfortable with, that I felt truly understood me, until him. She finished hatefully, with more spite than she had already been speaking to Naruto with. How was I supposed to know you had powers and you were immortal? Naruto defended verbally, his desire to fight having faded away once he realized that she had been a friend. You never said anything. You never talked about yourself when you were anywhere near me, ever. And I couldn't just stay either. Not only were there too many things happening all over Europe and the entire world at the time, if he had stayed for any reason as long as Yoshino apparently had, then the same suspicions that had been thrust onto her would have been cast upon him as well. He had been alive for more than long enough by that point to know that normal people didn't take decades of youthful appearance passively, so even if he wanted to stay in one place he wouldn't be able to. Besides, he hated overusing hench for that reason. He liked the way he looked. I didn't know that you had powers and that you were immortal. I just thought you were a traveling mercenary. Yoshino fired back. If I had known that, and even if I had shown you, you probably would have just tried to kill me like the others. Thinking I was a monster just like them. She abruptly shut up, however, when she felt a rise of rather angry power from Naruto as he started radiating black chakra off of his person. You're going to stand there and compare me to some idiots that would just attack a person because they found out they were different? Naruto asked, biting back his voice from raising any higher, though it was quite clear that he was angry. In his anger, Naruto punched the ground with a massive yell, forcing the ground to rock harshly from the magnitude. Following the punch, cracks from the ground branched off from his point of impact and shook into the decrepit old hospital nearby, bringing the entire front wall of the abandoned facility shaking and crumbling down. If we were really close, then you would have known that I would never attack first and ask questions later. Especially a friend. Just the idea of anyone comparing Naruto to any sort of witch-burning bigots that he had seen countless numbers of in his time in existence made him greatly upset. He had become desensitized to most of the violence that seemed to surround his endeavors, but that always seemed to be his pet peeve, going right up there with people questioning his personality and taking his normally bright persona as a sign of ignorance towards the way the world was. It was even worse coming from someone that knew him. The chakra radiating off of Naruto was intense and full of malintent, so much so that Yoshino began backing away from him. This is Naruto's power. Where was this back when I knew him? I could never sense anything from him at all back then. The almost invisible silhouette of mammoth black tails seemed to flicker around Naruto's body like ghosts to a normal person in Yoshino's eyes. I don't know enough about him to fight him here. She looked around for an opening to escape and beat a temporary retreat until she could at least figure out what she was possibly dealing with from Naruto. Meanwhile, with Naruto himself, he knew that there was something wrong. Not only did he seem to get far angrier than he otherwise would have in response to what Yoshino said about him, he most certainly did not consciously trigger pulling up any special chakra from the creature sitting deep within him. He had to take time to collect himself and calm down with deep breaths in order to rein himself in. I've only really lost myself like that when it looks like the Jubi is about to wake up. Naruto thought to himself through his loud breaths, taken to keep himself calm. This is not good. It hasn't even been long since the last time I fought it. How could it be waking up so soon? He figured that he had several hundred more years before he had to even worry about preparing himself again, but he was certain that he wasn't mistaken in what he was feeling. Naruto. Naruto turned around and saw Yoruichi appear before him with a look of worry on her face. Feeling that he was even-tempered once more, Naruto walked over to the feline-themed woman, Yoruichi-chan. You found me. He looked around and clicked his teeth in disappointment. His little episode scared off Yoshino and gave her time to actually escape. He simply couldn't feel her energy signature without being in sage mode or in his Jinchuriki state, and even then it was faint. A frown came over her face. You were pouring out a terrible energy from your body. I'd be surprised if any spiritually aware being in Karakura town didn't feel it. I was just the first one here. She looked around at the fiery battlefield and the mostly demolished hospital building. Are you all right? She asked, taking note of his singed and burned clothes, though by now his minor wounds had long since healed. I'm fine. Naruto assured her. How was he supposed to explain anything that had just occurred though? It wasn't exactly something he was eager to share. Oh hey, you know the soul-sucking going on around Karakura town. I know the woman doing it. I let her escape too, but don't worry, it was only because the world-ending monster stuck inside me almost woke up and threw a temper tantrum. When it rains it pours, he guessed. I got into a fight with a bound. At least that's what she said they were called. Yoruichi let out a short grunt and crossed her arms over her chest. Kazuki was right then, damn it. She shook her head and looked towards the damaged area that was still burning. We should go. With that, both Naruto and Yoruichi disappeared swiftly to return to the base. XXX. Gerda had been sealed back into object form as Yoshino ran further away from the site of her fight with Naruto. I barely even marked him and he didn't even seem to be trying until the end. All of that power was just, I would have had to fuse to even hope to have a chance against it. She thought as she jumped over a fence and kept running away. The retreat continued until a male voice managed to get her to stop cold in her tracks. You know he doesn't like it when you run away like this, Yoshino. You're very special to him. You're special to all of us. Stopping in place, Yoshino turned around to face the figure standing directly behind her. A young-looking man with blue eyes and short brown hair with a small amount of facial hair on his chin stood there calmly. He wore a white button-up shirt and a green vest and tie with black dress pants and shoes along with a black fedora atop his head. He had a smirk on his face and a devious look in his eyes. Damn it. It would have been him, wouldn't it? Yoshino thought to herself as there was no running away now, not with the bounce bloodhound nipping at her heels. What are you doing here, Kane? I just told you. Kane said, seemingly taking the whole thing as a game. He doesn't like it when you run away, Yoshino. Now personally, I don't care because it gives me something to do other than hunt for food. I didn't even take any souls tonight just so I could look for you. He said with a rather wide grin. If you want to run, that'd be fine because I think the chase would be fun. And if you want to skip the attempt to escape and just fight, that would be even better for me. Brat. Yoshino growled out as she actually did ponder summoning Gerda again to try and take Kane down a peg, but she was fully aware of the fact that he was held up on a pedestal of sorts. He had broken himself repeatedly for the last century or so to achieve his power and skill faster than basically any other, and said power was the peak of combat skill for a bout. There wasn't any doubt that without proper motivation Yoshino would be defeated by Kane cleanly enough for him to simply return her. Thus she gave in and merely walked towards him, still glaring at him though as she passed him in order to return home, where the others were waiting. Ah. Kane said, hands in his pockets as he followed behind her. I thought you were going to be more fun than that, Yoshino. I'm disappointed. The woman merely remained silent as they continued back to their own area of operations. However, Kane looked up at the sky where he could see the smoke and debris from Yoshino's fight with Naruto still floating up. That power I felt, it's just like back then. I can't wait to show you that my strength is more amazing than yours. You won't ever make me look so weak ever again. XXX. Hours later, Naruto's base. You knew about. Urahara asked incredulously as he sat in the dining area of the base along with Yoruichi, Hidan, Gaara, and the Mod Souls. Well, that makes sense, I guess, even if the chances of running into one would be slim at best. I didn't know she was about 250 years ago. Genius, Naruto muttered, picking at his dinner with his chopsticks. He wasn't in the mood to eat and he had barely lost any chakra to need to eat to replenish any strength. I didn't even know what about was. I couldn't readily see full ghosts either, remember. She never used any special abilities and I didn't even want her as a friend at first. He wanted the explanation to end because in addition to the pressing bound issue he also had to check with a more personal matter at his first opportunity. Wait, Yoruichi cut in, I thought you said you hadn't tried actively befriending anyone in 1000 years. Naruto shrugged in response, I didn't try to be friends with her. For some reason she tried getting closer to me. I met her in a Prussian village. She was a lonely woman in a small village and most able-bodied men were serving in the standing army at the time, and I guess I was the only person that was really around her age that was there. Apparently she was more right than she knew. Flashback. Prussia 1755. Naruto thought that he really needed to stop getting sage coats tailored for himself, or at least he needed to stop wearing them so much. The fabric and eye-catching nature of the piece of his favored clothing made people think he was rich. Now he was rich, but that didn't really matter. Even as he walked through the village that he had decided to take residence just outside of in the woods, he could hear people commenting on him. He couldn't really fault them, there wasn't much in these small places to do other than to work or gossip, so he let it slide. On the other hand, it looked like war was about to begin again. The enemies of this country had built their strength back up from past defeats and were ready to attempt another prolonged conflict. Since he had begun his wandering, things had gotten harder and harder. Keeping the peace from the background seemed impossible. Hell, keeping the peace period seemed impossible. But he had to try though, which was why he had come to Prussia in the first place. As he entered and walked through the forest that kept his self-constructed home concealed, Naruto decided to sit down under a tree so that he could take a break. I really wish things were like they were back when I first started wandering. At least then the world was smaller and my name held some damn weight. Not like now. I can't even get a private conversation with any kings or anything because I'm a nobody, and I can't get close without getting an audience without being called an assassin. He had discovered around 500 years prior that nothing he did to avert war worked. Early attempts at trying to pass on teachings the way the original Raikudo Sennin did only wound up with his teachings being used to propagate even more war, and trying to show his own power and force never ended well at all. All he could do was attempt to shorten conflicts and protect innocents, but even that was getting harder and harder. People fight like crap these days, Naruto thought as he let his mind wander when he considered how Europeans engaged in open warfare. Of course the way he fought would have had people accuse him of being a savage, but he'd rather be a live savage than a dead gentleman. He didn't even use guns, but then again Rasenshuriken beats gun, it also beat cannon, and warship. Hell, Rasenshuriken beat everything these days. Maybe I should just disappear on a mountain somewhere to just get away from all of this. As Naruto shut his eyes to attempt to meditate for a bit to pass the time, he thought of just becoming a hermit. Nah, I'd go crazy from boredom. Besides, it would only last for maybe 100 years before someone found me. His meditation quickly picked up on the presence of someone nearby, close enough to see what he was doing. In case it was someone wishing to do him harm for some reason, he opened his eyes and called them out. Come out so I can see you. If you're going to watch me, I want to see you too. It took a second or so, but from behind a tree nearby a woman walked out. She wore a long light-colored dress and shroud on her head, covering her long brown hair. Her face didn't have much life to it, so she wasn't there to fight him. It didn't seem she was there for much of anything, as her brown eyes looked at him with a dull interest while he stared right back with a placid expression. The two just stared at each other for the longest time without saying a word, Naruto trying to decipher what it was the woman was looking for by observing him. He had seen her around the town whenever he came around because he could remember never seeing her around anyone else. Didn't she have any family or friends? You're like me. Naruto blinked in confusion as he heard the woman finally speak up. Apparently she realized what she had done and blushed, not meaning to say that out loud as she averted her eyes away from his. What do you mean I'm like you? Naruto asked. I really doubt that you're anything like me. Getting her nerve back quickly in the face of the strange blonde man whom no one knew his name, the woman voiced her reasoning. Well, whenever you come into town you never speak to anyone. You've been here for over a year and it's rather strange. So now I'm strange. Naruto said with a smirk. Maybe if he could get this woman to think she had offended him she would leave him alone. What exactly would occur if he became friends with her? Nothing positive in the long run, that was for certain proven in the past. Yes. Well, that plan certainly backfired most spectacularly. Offending him apparently wasn't a big concern to her, something else that was different about this woman, but I think in a good way. You're not like anyone else, but you don't seem dangerous, you honestly seem kind of lonely. Naruto raised an eyebrow, getting her to explain further. That's what I meant by saying that you're like me. But you're beautiful. Naruto blurted out before thinking things through. Seeing the surprise on the woman's face, he backtracked a bit with a sheepish grin. I mean, why would anyone like you be lonely? You seem more than nice enough. A grateful smile came onto the woman's face. I'm kind of different from other people. Please don't make me tell you why. I don't think you would even believe me if I told you. Chuckling at someone thinking they could show him something that he had never seen before, Naruto decided to respond. Don't be so sure. I've seen pretty much everything you could see in my lifetime. I don't think you could surprise me with much. Yes, I assume a mercenary such as yourself has seen quite a bit. The woman said with a patronizing smile before taking a moment to think. You are a mercenary, aren't you? You don't seem to be from around here. You don't even seem to be from this country. In addition to that, you dress strangely and you've been seen carrying weapons before. No firearms though, strange. Close enough, I guess, Naruto said with a deadpan look on his face, and I don't like rifles or anything like that. It's just the way I am. A nervous look overcame the face of Naruto's new female acquaintance as she made to ask another question. I rather enjoy walking through the forest in my spare time, but it's clear that you live here. I would hate to trouble you in case my presence here ever caused me to stumble upon your home. You seem to like your privacy, mister. You can call me Naruto. He didn't know why she was nervous, whether she was afraid of him or otherwise, but he wasn't a jerk enough to tell her that she couldn't walk around on land that he didn't even own. Especially since his house was more or less a hut with barely enough room for him to eat and sleep in, and sure thing. You can come here whenever you want to. Just be careful wandering around. There are some pretty scary things someone could run into out here. That didn't sound creepy or suspicious at all, did it? From her reaction she didn't seem to care too much. I'm sure. The woman said, letting out a slight laugh. By the way, my name is. End flashback. Yoshino, Naruto said as he brought his thought process to an end. Her name is Yoshino. He said in a reserved manner as he thought more along the time span where he actually knew the woman. I was only there for 3 years though. I guess I left an impression. Naruto said the last thing dryly, but there wasn't really anything humorous about the current situation. Maybe she liked me too much to try and suck out my soul. Urahara chimed in again. Bounce don't really go for taking souls from living humans, at least not until now. I haven't heard of so many cases happening at once before. They usually take the souls of dead humans that are trying to pass on, but this gives the bounce immortality. Hidan had enough of the loose descriptions since he had been hearing them all night thus far. Okay, enough of all of this mystery attacker shit. What the fuck is a bound? Why the fuck do I care, and how the fuck do you kill it? Please let it be with sharp objects and lots of physical violence and blood. The mod souls in attendance all let out a shiver as Hidan grinned following his last statement. However, everyone else had more than adjusted for Hidan's own personal brand of lunacy and thus resulted in being unfazed by his words as Urahara carried on. Bounce are living beings much like Quincy's, or only they were artificially created centuries ago in an explosion by a Shinigami scientist. Well, out of embarrassment for what happened in creating them by mistake, the fact that they posed a threat to the balance of the worlds because of their consumption of souls, and because the explosion took out a tenth of the Seraiti, the Bounce were meant to be destroyed by order of the Central 46. A few must have survived then. Gaara's stoic face was clearly not pleased by what he was hearing. I heard that the Shinigami did the same thing to the Quincy race as well. The more I hear, the less I like about this Central 46. These were more or less genocides, simply because it wasn't convenient to allow the races to keep existing. There is always a way to resolve such issues without exterminating one side or the other, a nonviolent method. I agree. Hidan said with a sage-like nod, surprising everyone in the room, except replace the word non with extremely, and after the word violent, you should include the word blood explosion extraordinaire. He said before cackling loudly in his normal maniacal manner. Yeah, that was more like it. And we're back. Yoruichi said in a deadpan voice, getting things on track once more. But yes, a lot of us aren't blind to the tons of imperfections that exist in the Seraiti. Still, it's the Spirit King who is in the real control, the only person that the Central 46 answers to, and no one has ever gone to see him and come back. Only members of Squad Zero, and they stay there in the realm of the Spirit King for the rest of their existence. Hearing about Soul Society politics, especially ones of this nature, was beginning to grate on Naruto's nerves, and made him glad that he was something of an anarchist at this point in time. Yoshino had this weird fire thing fighting for her that seemed sentient. She called it a doll, and it seemed to be the thing that embodied most of her combat powers, so I guess all Bounce have something like that too. Urahara nodded in reply, and these Mod Soul guys are going to help us find them. That's right. Urahara said brightly, feel free to throw in a bonus for my services once this is all said and done. I'll definitely feel free to not do that. Naruto said, getting a disappointed groan out of the blonde scientist before focusing on the task at hand. This is good though. Maybe now that we can actually readily detect the presence of Bounce, we can have some warning when it's time to fight next time and I don't have to get hypnotized. Hidan found that last bit of information hilarious. You got caught in a glorified genjutsu. Ha. You're a sucker for illusions. That's just outstanding. The jab from Hidan, who wasn't much better with illusions and mostly survived them during his ninja career due to the fact that nothing could kill him in battle and he could just injure himself heavily enough to break any genjutsu, didn't get Naruto to rise and engage in a battle of words, much to everyone's surprise. It couldn't have just been the Bounce thing working his nerves, Yoruichi figured. Fighting an army of Shinigami in the middle of their stronghold didn't give him much pause, nor did heading feet first into the realm full of hollows on a whim, and the key to reading Naruto's mindset was through his eyes when it wasn't evident by his words. In that case, his eyes were seemingly full of thoughts of a negative nature. XXX. Visored's hideout, training ground. I am so sick of fighting you. Ichigo yelled at Hiyori with his hollow mask on his face as they clashed blades. Back off, you pygmy. Or at least let somebody else fight me for once, I'm getting bored here. The small pig-tailed warrior took offense to the fact that she was apparently boring Ichigo, even if he had a point since he had acclimated very well to taking the full measure of her attack, as much as she was allowed to utilize anyway against an ally, which was still quite a massive amount of power. Well, I'm the only one that feels like fighting your lame ass to get you to manifest your mask better, so shut up or get cut. As they continued to fight and the others remained as they were, just hanging out around the training area doing next to nothing, Naruto literally dropped in through the entrance at the top without a sound as his feet hit the ground. He walked forward until he ran into the barrier with his face and pressed it against it. Yo, someone drop this thing so I can get in. Fish cake. Mashiro said happily as she walked over to him from the inside of the barrier. You got in. But how did you get through the barrier outside? Hachi put up one out there and 3 down here. Well, I broke the one outside for kicks, and because I thought it might piss a few of you off. And I'm guessing that I just walked into the 3 others since I can't go forward anymore. He said, getting a nod from the green-haired ditzy woman in return. Cool, now could Hachi drop these 3? I've got some business. A nod came from the rather large man as he did what was requested of him. The appearance of Naruto and the lowering of the barriers gained the attention of the rest of the Visoreds and the combating Ichigo and Hiyori, the latter of whom was rather perturbed at the interruption. Huh? What do you want here, dumbass? Do you want a beatdown too? You haven't given me a beatdown in days. Ichigo yelled heatedly, throwing his mask to the ground, getting upset at her belittling of his strides with his abilities. Ignoring both of them, Naruto marched right up to Ichigo and stared him down closely enough to unnerve Ichigo at the proximity. Can I help you? Naruto continued to appraise Ichigo without saying a word before putting a glowing black hand on Ichigo's forehead. Another moment passed before Naruto gave a thumbs up to Hiyori. Yeah, this is great. Wonder Boy is ready to rock and roll. Good work, you guys. Shinji stepped forward. You can't just yank him out of here, Naruto. We weren't done with him yet. Hiyori hasn't gotten a chance to vent on anyone like this in decades. I mean, his training isn't done yet. He can only keep his mask on for over a minute. That was his limit. Truthfully, only more fighting and hands-on experience at this point would tack on any more time to Ichigo's mask time until it became instinct for him to keep it on. But Hiyori hadn't had a good punching bag since they first wound up in the world of the living, and Ichigo was like Teflon. No matter what, the effects of a beating just never stuck to him. A deadpan look came at the de facto leader of the fallen Shinigami from Naruto before he looked back at Ichigo with the exact same expression, Wonder Boy. Yep. Ichigo responded quickly with a blank look on his face, used to Naruto's nickname for him by now. Feeling good. You know it. No more hollow takeovers. Nope. Let's roll then. Awesome. And with that, Naruto and Ichigo simply strode on out of the warehouse with apparently no strings attached. The others were stunned at how Naruto just walked in and walked out with Ichigo in tow like they were glorified babysitters. Did Ichigo even work for Naruto? Wait. Does Naruto pay for this kind of stuff? Kensai asked, vaguely remembering Naruto talking about some kind of job opportunity in the past, because we need money. To hell with money. Hiyori yelled, seething at what had just happened. That dandelion-headed bastard just took my punching bag. I'm going to kick his ass the next time he shows his face in here. At that point, Naruto's head popped back into the room upside down from the real warehouse section above ground back into the training room. I'll give him back on one condition. You guys help me with this stuff that's going on right now. Then you can keep trying to kick the crap out of Ichigo. Is it Aizen? Lisa asked, curious as to what would be the reason. No. But I'm just thinking a full court press could nip some trouble in the bud right now. Naruto answered honestly, come on, you could have him back until I need him again for just one mission for me. All of you don't even need to leave to help. A unanimous answer went up from the entirety of the group, not interested. Before Naruto could open his mouth to try and barter out another service deal from the very difficult to deal with Visoreds, Ichigo grabbed him by the roof of the mouth and pulled him back up through the opening. Would you quit trying to pimp me out for favors when you're not even paying me? You're almost as bad as Urahara. And who are we supposed to be fighting again? XXX. Bount Mansion. So you're saying that's what you felt, aren't you? A tall, powerful-looking man with white hair, red eyes, and long eyebrows asked as he sat down in an ornate-looking chair. He had a vertical scar on his chin and wore a brown and dark blue trench coat over suit-like clothing, our old friend Uzumaki Naruto. At his side was a man with short black hair wearing a sleeveless Shinigami uniform, taking up the position of a bodyguard of sorts. Kane nodded with a smirk on his face as he took his fedora off, just as strong as ever, but I've got a question for you, Karya. If you knew who he was even all those years ago, then why didn't you try to kill him to get him out of the way? The white-haired man Karya's face exuded calm confidence and a distinct lack of offense at the question. When I first learned of him, he was a means to an end to secure something I wanted and we needed. I didn't expect him to survive, but he did because I was unaware of his powers at the time, and I never imagined that his lifespan was just as long as ours. I simply didn't see him as a threat. He then noticed Kane's eyes narrow at the prospect of Naruto not being a threat. You still despise him, don't you? Kane didn't answer. He simply turned to leave the room. Back then I was too weak to manage my own power. It was great enough to destroy me. But he handled it as if it were nothing. My own power that even I didn't have control over. Well, it's time to see how my strength truly compares to his now that me and my doll are in sync. XXX. The next day, Naruto's base. With pretty much the entire group of combat-ready Karakura High School students assembled at long last now that Ichigo had been finally sprung from his never-ending sparring match against Hiyori, briefing was finally able to be fully given on the current situation. After hearing about the bounce and how they were going around attacking people, Ichigo was itching to test out his new power on an opponent, thus the entire situation with the bounce couldn't have occurred at a more opportunistic time for him. The only ones actually feeling left out were Ryu due to his lack of powers and Tatsuki, because Naruto still had her training. How much power does it take to pop this damn rubber ball? I'm pumping out all of the chakra I can. Tatsuki growled as she was visibly straining her chakra into the small rubber ball in her right hand. Naruto had better be glad he was on the roof, not to be disturbed without a reason, or else he would have been getting an earful from his hot-headed student. As she did this and decided to keep an ear in on the meeting, Urahara held up 3 pieces of round candy. These are the mod souls that are able to detect bounce. You should put them in something a little less conspicuous so that you can keep them close at all times, even at school, just in case. He handed one to Ichigo, seeing as he believed out of the lot of the younger ones he would be the quickest one to find a fight if it was to occur. Here you go. This one is Ririn. Another one was handed to Chad. You get Noba. And the last one was given to Orihime. You've got Kuroto. Ichigo was quick to realize that it was just like the candy that housed Khan's soul, so that was easy enough to find a body for. All he needed was another doll or a stuffed animal or something. What about everyone else? Why don't they get one? Urahara grinned before answering Ichigo's question, because Naruto can actually sense them like the mod souls and find their location if he's in his sage mode, so he's basically his own bounce detector. Yoruichi is meant to sit here on the base to wait for something. Gaara will be with you all anyway during school or with Naruto here, so he doesn't need one. Because even if Hidan gets sneak attacked, well, we don't care because it's not like he can die in his Gigai even if they get him with a good attack, and because Ryu doesn't have powers, so if he fought a bout he'd just be delivering himself on a silver platter to them. Literally, because they would probably just eat his soul. Attention was not paid to the raincloud forming over the silent Ryu's head at Urahara's blunt statement that he was more or less useless. Chad held up the small piece of candy that held Noba's spirit. Got it. He said plainly as he headed out to find a plush toy or something to use for Noba's container. The next to leave was Orihime to do the same. Right. If anything strange happens, I'll call as quickly as I can. This left Ichigo and Ryu alone with Urahara and Tatsuki. Ichigo blinked and looked at the little ball of candy that had been given to him before shrugging. Alright, I'm heading out too, I guess. Ryu. Tatsuki. Either of you guys want to come with me? Honestly, Ichigo was just glad to be out of that damned warehouse after so long being stuck in there. He was absolutely loving life at the moment, and the offer to go do anything at all with Ryu was evidence enough of that. I would rather not, Kurosaki. Ryu replied coolly. It wasn't that he didn't want to go searching for bounce, it was just that Urahara was right. In the instance he found a bounce, then what would he do? Ichigo was better off on his own, as much as he hated to admit it. He would be an albatross if he were to tag along. Damn that Shinigami Kuritsuchi Mayuri. I lost my powers trying to kill him and he didn't even have the courtesy to die. Looking over to Tatsuki at that point, Ichigo didn't get a much better answer from her as she proceeded to address him in cavewoman form. Need to pop stupid ass rubber ball and learn cool jutsu that grinds through stuff. Go find and kill bounce. Tatsuki managed to grit out through her focus. Wow, Ichigo thought with a sweat drop. I didn't really expect the cold shoulder from both of them. Ishida maybe, but from Tatsuki too. She must really want to learn that attack. Ichigo scratched the back of his head before shoving his hands into his pockets and walking off. Alright, fine. I'll see you guys later then. XXX. On the roof of the base, Gaara and Hidan took note of Ichigo, Orihime, and Chad walking off on their own separate ways. In the case of the next bounce sighting they would be ready to move out, but for now they had another issue that they were being briefed on. You think the Jubi is stirring? Gaara said in his normal calm-sounding tone, but if one knew him well enough they could hear the shock in the redhead's voice. That is, very discomforting. For you maybe. Hidan said nonchalantly. The Jubi can be as scary as it wants to be, it can't kill me motherfuckers. Or did you both forget that part? True. Gaara admitted freely, but it could devour you and you could suffer for an eternity in its bowels, being digested until the end of time or until your Gigai actually does die from a lack of nourishment. That would also drain all of your Reiatsu, which means that your soul would die as well and your soul would be recycled. Thus when you were reincarnated you would not have your curse powers or any sort of memory at all, if mankind would even exist by the time you were reincarnated. That little revelation gave Hidan pause, because he had not thought that far ahead. Damn, Gaara and his cage smart train of thought to burst his immortality bubble, I didn't think of that as a possibility. Damn, that would be like getting stuck in the lazy-ass kid's forest buried alive, only worse, or purgatory. The silver-haired sadist turned towards Naruto, who hadn't spoken a word since he and Gaara had been given the news straight from the horse's mouth about what was happening. So how long do we have? Naruto's eyes remained closed as he attempted to keep up his meditation in addition to speaking to his friends. Honestly, I have no idea. It could just be a flare-up and I still have hundreds of years left, but do you really think we're that lucky? When it rains for us it pours, ever since the day we were born. Gaara said, speaking from experience for both himself and Naruto, simultaneously answering Naruto's rhetorical question at the same time, so this has never happened before. Not this soon after I had already beaten him. Naruto said, a frown on his face as he continued to meditate. Once every 1,000 years, give or take a few centuries. I've fought him 3 times, and that's 2 times too many as far as I'm concerned. The first time happened in Italy a few hundred years after the war ended and I didn't know what the little spurts of anger and difficulty suppressing my chakra meant, so I got totally blindsided when Sasuke decided to wake up the first time, and he was pissed. No shit. Hidan chimed in unceremoniously. Unfettered by the interruption, Naruto continued where Hidan had stopped him from. We tore the entire landscape apart for 4 days straight. Earthquakes, nasty lightning storms, the works. Nobody in the area besides me walked away by the time it was all over, and people that explored the place afterwards said that a volcano, Vesuvius, did it. The volcano didn't do it, we did it. I did it. Despite her lack of inclusion in the council of the former shinobi, Yoruichi was hidden nearby in her cat transformation to help subdue her energy output in order to lessen the chance of her presence being discovered by her comrades during their private conversation. Needless to say, she was hearing the whole thing. Volcano, Yoruichi thought before the event linked up with the place and the cause. Oh no, Naruto, Shinigami were well aware of the events of Mount Vesuvius due to the massive influx of thousands of souls following the disaster that had gone largely unexplained. The absurd amount of traffic that the Soul Society received immediately afterwards kept them from ever trying to search for why it had occurred in the first place. By the time things had calmed down there was no sign of the cause of the tens of thousands of deaths. Don't tell me that was you. What about the second time it occurred? Gaara inquired curiously. You said you fought him 3 times. He told me he only fought the monster in him twice. Yoruichi thought to herself, why did he lie? The second time was 1,000 years later and I knew it was coming from the feeling I was having, so I was able to get to the Sahara Desert where there was less of a chance of someone getting hurt. A wry smile came upon Naruto's face at that point that held little humor. It was a very good idea, because the time my mind was clear enough to actually fight him. It was so easy the time that I don't even consider that one of the times we've fought. It only took a day to put that bastard back to sleep that time. Jubi or not, it had Sasuke's mindset and he was overconfident from the first fight because he almost won. He didn't fight with any urgency. Sucker. Hidan gave Naruto a thumbs down and a raspberry. No random innocent bystanders dead. Thumbs down, Uzumaki brat. Jashin-sama would not have approved. He let out a sigh and shook his head. Just like movies, I guess, the sequel is never as good as the original. Naruto's eyes opened, revealing that he was in sage mode and was able to keep gathering nature chakra even while conversing. I think a few people died, but only around a dozen or so because they ventured close enough to try and get a look. The third time I ran up to the Arctic Circle around the 1800s, and we tore it all up. That was the worst one because he was pissed, he was aware, and he fought like he had nothing to lose because he didn't. I still don't know how I won that one. I was hurt so bad after it was over that I couldn't get back to civilization. I had to make an emergency hideout to stash all of my equipment that I brought for the fight just so that I had somewhere sort of safe to heal. Something caught Gaara's attention though. Naruto, you have the Rinnegan, correct? Naruto gave an affirmative grunt. So if you have the powers of the Raikudo Sennin, why do you not just reseal the Jubi in the moon? Or something like the moon, since you have the same jutsu that created it in your repertoire. A deadpan stare came from Naruto. You don't think that I didn't think of that in over 2,000 years of being stuck with the bastard in my gut. All that would do would seal Sasuke's Jubi body away, and then I'd just end up making the 9 Biju all over again, free to roam I might add, with no one else able to seal them away because I'd be dead. So instead of one ultimate monster of destruction that can't die, there would be 9 weaker versions, that can't die. Versions that no one else in the world of the living would be able to deal with, since no one knows anything of how to make Jinchuriki to contain them. Hidan let out a scoff at Naruto. You're just afraid to die, aren't you? Gaara turned to Hidan, seemingly taking more offense at the slight than Naruto did, as the blonde expressed no interest in what Hidan was saying. Take that back, Hidan. Gaara warned him, the cork on the top of his gourd popping off as sand drifted out. To hear anyone doubt his best friend's sense of valor deeply irked him. He seemed prepared to fight when he realized that Naruto hadn't risen to the insult. Naruto simply let his Rinnegan come into view as he made eye contact with Hidan. If you think I'm afraid to die, then you're as dumb as I look. Say I do it. Say that I pull it off and create the 9 Biju all over again. Then what? Yeah, it'll kill me, but that's not the point. The point is, who's going to clean up the mess afterwards? There is no next generation to solve the problem. No one in the world of the living can do it, and neither can anyone in the Seraiti if they even felt like stepping in. I wouldn't be surprised if they somehow found a way to make the Biju into their own weapon if I was vindictive enough to release them in the Soul Society. Hidan realized that he had subtly struck a nerve, and didn't feel like getting sealed away again. Naruto would be meaner about it and more thorough than Shikamaru was because he wasn't as lazy. He would make a moon and chuck him away into space, never to be seen again if he were really upset. Okay, well, what about Hueco Mundo? We can do it right now, let's roll. A large hand of sand then slapped Hidan across the back of the head. Oi. Not an option either. Gaara said, calling his sand back and crossing his arms over his chest. It was said that when a Jinchuriki died and the seal holding the demon back was strong enough to ensure such, the demon would die as well, only they would reform after a period of time and rampage on Earth again. So where did they reform? That means that the Biju can hop planes of existence to and from Hueco Mundo. What about the Soul Society? Hidan queried. Hey, he was technically a hollow and he was technically evil, so what did he care if the Biju were all unleashed in the Soul Society? Dump that crap in the hands of the Shinigami for all he cared. Apparently he had also forgotten Naruto's earlier point about the Biju being made into weapons by the Seraiti if they could keep the demons from outright destroying the entire population of normal souls wherever they roamed. Gaara was quick with a theory. Since the Soul Society apparently never had any reports of Biju activity among them, I would assume that there are safeguards in place to prevent simple plane hopping to the Soul Society, and they never manifested there either. Either that or the Biju are intelligent enough to stay away from there. Needless to say, if he released them in Hueco Mundo, then they could hop to the world of the living anyway. Maybe the original Raikudo Sennin was aware of the other realms and attempted to do the same thing. Only he died after doing so the way Naruto would if he tried it. He probably died thinking that he had solved the Jubi problem, not knowing that he had only complicated the matter. Remember, despite what was said about him, he was just a man, not a god. Hidan stroked his chin in thought. What about hell? Nothing can get out of hell from what Yoruichi says. I don't know how to get to hell without dying first and being unrepentantly evil in the process. Naruto said with a grunt. Now I don't think I'd have much of a problem with that, being stuck there myself for all eternity if I could keep Jubi Sasuke there, but here's the thing, if I die then guess what? Sasuke immediately comes out in full-on Jubi mode, free to roam the planet, more pissed than ever, and ready to rampage with nobody to stop him. Well, you could. Hidan started, prepared to say something else before he stopped and stroked his chin in a pondering manner. After a minute or two of failed thinking, he finally growled and shouted, damn it. That's a fucking whammy. That's quite a whammy. Gaara said in agreement. I've got nothing. Hidan said, wiping his hands of the whole situation. I quit. Good luck with holding back the end of all existence with your spongy little flesh body Uzumaki. Naruto held up a single hand that tilted back and forth as he gave a deadpan expression. That's why I'm the keeper of the balance. Did you think I just thought the title up to be cute? Silence reigned over the rooftop. Okay, I did, but there was a reason for it. It wasn't just me being bored and coming up with 6 million nicknames for myself. So if you ever flat out die in battle, or if during one of your little challenges you lose to the Jubi, Air Sasuke, or whatever the Uchiha runt's name was, then we're all screwed. Hidan asked with a raised eyebrow. If he's that strong, then how can you keep beating him? Because he lives in my gut and I'm used to his chakra and can use massive amounts of it while we fight to drain him. Because he's Sasuke, so I know his nature. Because the strength of my will keeps him from releasing all of his power from the get-go. Because he's sluggish and sleepy as hell every time he wakes up. I mean, for Kami's sake, he sleeps for most of the millennium before he decides to wake up each time. Naruto stated, listing each reason why on his fingers. Oh, and because I'm the baddest man that has ever lived. That's the most important part, Datbeo. Yoruichi had to mentally laugh at such a self-inflated sense of opinion, but considering everything that had preceded it to this point, she couldn't say that it was entirely unfounded in its reasoning. She wanted to confront him and talk to him about his situation. There had to be a reason he didn't want to tell her or Urahara or anyone else about it, and she wanted to trust him, but she just wanted to know. Still, it might have been because there were more pressing issues at hand. Anyway, she figured that she would trust in him. She had not been given a reason to mistrust him, but between the bound woman Yoshino, the eternal life destined to be spent in perpetual combat with the creature of his culture's apocalypse, and the catastrophic battles for the sake of the mortal plane waged over the timeline with said creature, who knew what else there was to this man. You are without a doubt the most interesting human that I have ever met, Naruto. Yoruichi thought as she walked back down the stairs to the inside of the building in her cat transformation form. I don't even think you could be called a human at this point. XXX. With Uryu. Sundown was the time of day in Karakura town as Uryu strode through town on his way home. It was killing him inside that he couldn't assist the others. Having spiritual awareness without the ability to actually do anything with what he could perceive around him was a hindrance. He could really understand how Tatsuki felt prior to her current training. She had been a girl that had spent her life learning to face her problems head-on and found that when it really came down to it, she had been unable to handle anything the way she figured she had been able to. She was for all intents and purposes powerless, no matter how much she attempted to remedy this. Until a loophole was created and she discovered a way to actually learn to deal with hollows. Unfortunately, that was not an option for Uryu. He had locked away his ability to deal with hollows and these bounts that were apparently running amok. He felt around in his pocket for his phone, ready to try and make a call. He needed to find a way to solve this problem, and at the moment there were only 2 people he would possibly bring something like this to, one of whom was out of the question due to them technically being a Shinigami. And by now it was abundantly clear that unlike Urahara, Naruto wasn't a Shinigami and had unorthodox ways to solve problems and tackle situations. Some of them were stupid approaches, but they worked, and if something was stupid but it worked, then it wasn't stupid. At this point Uryu would do nearly any stupid act necessary to regain his Quincy powers. Plus he had nothing to lose by calling and asking. This was his state of mind as he hit the speed dial number and placed the phone to his ear, waiting on someone to pick up. Thinking so hard about his own lack of powers, Uryu failed to notice that behind him the cracks in the sidewalk he had been walking on began to form strange-looking snakes that slithered along the ground behind him.